This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Volume 2, Chapter 19. Miss Ophelia's Experiences and Opinions Continued.
"Tom, you needn't get me the horses. I don't want to go," she said.
"Why not, Miss Eva?"
"These things sink into my heart, Tom," said Eva. "They sink into my heart," she repeated earnestly. "I don't want to go."
And she turned from Tom and went into the house. A few days after, another woman came in old Prue's place to bring the rusks. Miss Ophelia was in the kitchen.
"Lord," said Dinah, "what's got Prue?"
"Prue isn't coming any more," said the woman mysteriously.
"Why not?" said Dinah. "She ain't dead, is she?"
"We doesn't exactly know. She's down cellar," said the woman, glancing at Miss Ophelia. After Miss Ophelia had taken the rusks, Dinah followed the woman to the door.
"What has got Prue, anyhow?" she said.
The woman seemed desirous, yet reluctant to speak, and answered in low, mysterious tone.
"Well, you mustn't tell nobody. Prue, she got drunk again, and they had her down cellar, and thar they left her all day. And I hearn 'em say that the flies had got to her, and she's dead."
Dinah held up her hands, and, turning, saw close by her side the spirit-like form of Evangeline, her large mystic eyes dilated with horror, and every drop of blood driven from her lips and cheeks.
"Lord bless us, Miss Eva's going faint away. What got us all to let her hear such talk? Her pa'll be rail mad."
"I shan't faint, Dinah," said the child firmly. "And why shouldn't I hear it? It ain't so much for me to hear it as for poor Prue to suffer it. Lor' sakes, it isn't for sweet delicate young ladies like you. These yer stories isn't. It's enough to kill 'em."
Eva sighed again and walked upstairs with a slow and melancholy step. Miss Ophelia anxiously inquired the woman's story. Dinah gave a very garrulous version of it, to which Tom added the particulars which he had drawn from her that morning. "An abominable business perfectly horrible!" she exclaimed as she entered the room where St. Clair lay reading his paper.
"Pray, what iniquity has turned up now?" said he.
"What now? Why, those folks have whipped Prue to death,"
said Miss Ophelia, going on with great strength of detail into the story and enlarging on its most shocking particulars. "I thought it would come to that some time," said St. Clair, going on with his paper.
"Thought so? Aren't you going to do anything about it?" said Miss Ophelia. "Haven't you got any selectmen or anybody to interfere and look after such matters?"
"It's commonly supposed that the property interest is a sufficient guard in these cases. If people choose to ruin their own possessions, I don't know what's to be done. It seems the poor creature was a thief and a drunkard, and so there won't be much hope to get up sympathy for her."
"It is perfectly outrageous! It is horrid, Augustine! It will certainly bring down vengeance upon you."
"My dear cousin, I didn't do it, and I can't help it. I would if I could. If low-minded, brutal people will act like themselves, what am I to do? They have absolute control. They are irresponsible despots. There would be no use in interfering. There is no law that amounts to anything practically for such a case. The best we can do is to shut our eyes and ears and let it alone. It's the only resource left us."
"How can you shut your eyes and ears? How can you let such things alone?"
"My dear child, what do you expect? Here is a whole class, debased, uneducated, indolent, provoking, put, without any sort of terms or conditions, entirely into the hands of such people as the majority in our world are, people who have neither consideration nor self-control, who haven't even an enlightened regard to their own interest, for that's the case with the largest half of mankind. Of course, in a community so organized, what can a man of honorable and humane feelings do but shut his eyes all he can and harden his heart? I can't buy every wretch I see. I can't turn knight-errant and undertake to redress every individual case of wrong in such a city as this. The most I can do is to try and keep out of the way of it." St. Clair's fine countenance was for a moment overcast. He said, "Come, cousin, don't stand there looking like one of the fates. You've only seen a peep through the curtain, a specimen of what is going on, the world over, in some shape or other. If we are to be prying and spying into all the dismals of life, we should have no heart to anything. 'Tis like looking too close into the details of Dinah's kitchen." And St. Clair lay back on the sofa and busied himself with his paper. Miss Ophelia sat down and pulled out her knitting work, and sat there grim with indignation. She knit and knit, but while she mused the fire burned. At last she broke out, "I tell you, Augustine, I can't get over things so, if you can. It's a perfect abomination for you to defend such a system. That's my mind." "What now?" said St. Clair, looking up. "At it again, hey?" "I say it's perfectly abominable for you to defend such a system," said Miss Ophelia, with increasing warmth. "I defend it, my dear lady? Whoever said I did defend it?" said St. Clair. "Of course you defend it. You all do, all you Southerners. What do you have slaves for if you don't?" "Are you such a sweet innocent as to suppose nobody in this world ever does what they don't think is right? Don't you, or didn't you ever, do anything that you did not think quite right?" "If I do, I repent of it, I hope," said Miss Ophelia, rattling her needles with energy. "So do I," said St. Clair, peeling his orange. "I'm repenting of it all the time." "What do you keep on doing it for?" "Didn't you ever keep on doing wrong after you'd repented, my good cousin?" "Well, only when I've been very much tempted," said Miss Ophelia. "Well, I'm very much tempted," said St. Clair. "That's just my difficulty." "But I always resolve I won't, and I try to break off." "Well, I have been resolving I won't, off and on, these 10 years," said St. Clair, "but I haven't, somehow, got clear. Have you got clear of all your sins, cousin?" "Cousin Augustine," said Miss Ophelia, seriously, and laying down her knitting work, "I suppose I deserve that you should reprove my shortcomings. I know all you say is true enough. Nobody else feels them more than I do. But it does seem to me, after all, there is some difference between me and you. It seems to me I would cut off my right hand sooner than keep on, from day to day, doing what I thought was wrong. But then my conduct is so inconsistent with my profession, I don't wonder you reprove me." "Oh, now, cousin," said Augustine, sitting down on the floor and laying his head back in her lap, "don't take on so awfully serious. You know what a good-for-nothing, saucy boy I always was. I love to poke you up, that's all, just to see you get earnest. I do think you are desperately, distressingly good. It tires me to death to think of it." "But this is a serious subject, my boy August," said Miss Ophelia, laying her hand on his forehead. "Dismally so," said he. "And well, I never want to talk seriously in hot weather. What with mosquitoes and all, a fellow can't get himself up to any very sublime moral flights. And I believe," said St. Clair, suddenly rousing himself up, "there's a theory now. I understand now why northern nations are always more virtuous than southern ones. I see into that whole subject." "Oh, Augustine, you are a sad rattle-brain." "Am I? Well, so I am, I suppose. But for once I will be serious, now. But you must hand me that basket of oranges. You see, you'll have to stay me with flagons and comfort me with apples, if I'm going to make this effort. Now," said Augustine, drawing the basket up, "I'll begin. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for a fellow to hold 2 or 3 dozen of his fellow-worms in captivity, a decent regard to the opinions of society requires—" "I don't see that you are growing more serious," said Miss Ophelia. "Wait, I'm coming on, you'll hear. The short of the matter is, cousin," said he, his handsome face suddenly settling into an earnest and serious expression, "on this abstract question of slavery there can, as I think, be but one opinion. Planters who have money to make by it, clergymen who have planters to please, politicians who want to rule by it, may warp and bend language and ethics to a degree that shall astonish the world at their ingenuity. They can press nature and the Bible, and nobody knows what else, into the service. But, after all, neither they nor the world believe in it one particle the more. It comes from the devil, that's the short of it." and to my mind it's a pretty respectable specimen of what he can do in his own line." Miss Ophelia stopped her knitting and looked surprised, and St. Clair, apparently enjoying her astonishment, went on: "You seem to wonder, but if you will get me fairly at it, I'll make a clean breast of it. This cursed business, accursed of God and man, what is it? Strip it of all its ornament, run it down to the root and nucleus of the whole, and what is it? Why, because my brother Quashy is ignorant and weak, and I am intelligent and strong, because I know how and can do it, therefore I may steal all he has, keep it, and give him only such and so much as suits my fancy. Whatever is too hard, too dirty, too disagreeable for me, I may set Quashy to doing. Because I don't like work, Quashy shall work. Because the sun burns me, Quashy shall stay in the sun. Quashy shall earn the money, and I will spend it. Quashy shall lie down in every puddle, that I may walk over dry shod. Quashy shall do my will, and not his, all the days of his mortal life, and have such chance of getting to heaven, at last, as I find convenient. This I take to be about what slavery is. I defy anybody on earth to read our slave code as it stands in our law books, and make anything else of it. Talk of the abuses of slavery! Humbug! The thing itself is the essence of all abuse. And the only reason why the land don't sink under it, like Sodom and Gomorrah, is because it is used in a way infinitely better than it is. For pity's sake, for shame's sake, because we are men born of women and not savage beasts, many of us do not, and dare not. We would scorn to use the full power which our savage laws put into our hands. And he who goes the furthest and does the worst only uses, within limits, the power that the law gives him." St. Clair has started up, and, as his manner was when excited, was walking, with hurried steps, up and down the floor. His fine face, classic as that of a Greek statue, seemed actually to burn with the fervor of his feelings. His large blue eyes flashed, and he gestured with an unconscious earnestness. Miss Ophelia had never seen him in this mood before, and she sat perfectly silent. "I declare to you," said he, suddenly stopping before his cousin, "it's no sort of use to talk or to feel on this subject, but I declare to you there have been times when I have thought, if the whole country would sink, and hide all this injustice and misery from the light, I would willingly sink with it. When I have been traveling up and down on our boats, or about on my collecting tours, and reflected that every brutal, disgusting, mean, low-lived fellow I met was allowed by our laws to become absolute despot of as many men, women, and children as he could cheat, steal, or gamble money enough to buy, when I have seen such men in actual ownership of helpless children, of young girls and women, I have been ready to curse my country, to curse the human race." "Augustine, Augustine," said Miss Ophelia, "I'm sure you've said enough. I never in my life heard anything like this even at the North." "At the North," said St. Clair, with a sudden change of expression, and resuming something of his habitual careless tone. "Pooh! Your Northern folk are cold-blooded. You are cool in everything. You can't begin to curse uphill and down as we can, when we get fairly at it."
"Well, but the question is," said
Miss Ophelia. "Oh, yes, to be sure, the question is, and a deuce of a question it is, how came you in this state of sin and misery? Well, I shall answer in the good old words you used to teach me Sundays. I came so by ordinary generation. My servants were my father's, and, what is more, my mother's, and now they are mine, they and their increase, which bids fair to be a pretty considerable item. My father, you know, came first from New England, and he was just such another man as your father, a regular old Roman, upright, energetic, noble-minded, with an iron will. Your father settled down in New England, to rule over rocks and stones and to force an existence out of nature, and mine settled in Louisiana, to rule over men and women, and force existence out of them. My mother," said St. Clair, getting up and walking to a picture at the end of the room, and gazing upward with a face fervent with veneration, "she was divine. Don't look at me so, you know what I mean. She probably was of mortal birth, but, as far as ever I could observe, there was no trace of any human weakness or error about her. and everybody that lives to remember her, whether bond or free, servant, acquaintance, relation, all say the same. Why, cousin, that mother has been all that has stood between me and utter unbelief for years. She was a direct embodiment and personification of the New Testament, a living fact to be accounted for, and to be accounted for in no other way than by its truth. "Oh, mother, mother," said St. Clair, clasping his hands in a sort of transport, and then suddenly checking himself, he came back, and seating himself on an ottoman, he went on. "My brother and I were twins, and they say, you know, that twins ought to resemble each other, but we were in all points a contrast. He had black, fiery eyes, coal-black hair, a strong, fine, Roman profile, and a rich brown complexion. I had blue eyes, golden hair, a Greek outline, and fair complexion. He was active and observing, I dreamy and inactive. He was generous to his friends and equals, but proud, dominant, overbearing to inferiors, and utterly unmerciful to whatever set itself up against him. Truthful we both were, he from pride and courage, I from a sort of abstract ideality. We loved each other, about as boys generally do, off and on, and in general. He was my father's pet, and I my mother's. There was a morbid sensitiveness and acuteness of feeling in me on all possible subjects, of which he and my father had no kind of understanding, and with which they could have no possible sympathy. But mother did. And so, when I had quarreled with Alfred, and father looked sternly on me, I used to go off to mother's room and sit by her. I remember just how she used to look, with her pale cheeks, her deep, soft, serious eyes, her white dress. She always wore white, and I used to think of her whenever I read in Revelations about the saints that were arrayed in fine linen, clean and white. She had a great deal of genius of one sort and another, particularly in music, and she used to sit at her organ, playing fine old majestic music of the Catholic Church, and singing with a voice more like an angel than a mortal woman. And I would lay my head down on her lap, and cry, and dream, and feel, oh, immeasurably, things that I had no language to say. In those days this matter of slavery had never been canvassed as it has now. Nobody dreamed of any harm in it. My father was a born aristocrat. I think, in some pre-existent state, he must have been in the higher circles of spirits, and brought all his old court pride along with him. For it was in grain, bred in the bone, though he was originally of poor and not in any way of noble family. My brother was begotten in his image. Now, an aristocrat, you know, the world over, has no human sympathies, beyond a certain line in society. In England the line is in one place, in Burma in another, and in America in another. But the aristocrat of all these countries never goes over it. What would be hardship and distress and injustice in his own class is a cool matter of course in another one. My father's dividing line was that of color. Among his equals never was a man more just and generous, but he considered the Negro, through all possible gradations of color, as an intermediate link between man and animals, and graded all his ideas of justice or generosity on this hypothesis. I suppose to be true, if anybody had asked him, plump and fair, whether they had human immortal souls, he might have hemmed and hawed and said yes. But my father was not a man much troubled with spiritualism. Religious sentiment he had none, beyond a veneration for God, as decidedly the head of the upper classes. Well, my father worked some 500 negroes. He was an inflexible, driving, punctilious businessman. Everything was to move by system, to be sustained with unfailing accuracy and precision. Now, if you take into account that all this was to be worked out by a set of lazy, twaddling, shiftless laborers, who had grown up all their lives in the absence of every possible motive to learn how to do anything but shirk, as you Vermonters say, and you'll see that there might naturally be, on his plantation, a great many things that looked horrible and distressing to a sensitive child like me. Besides all, he had an overseer, great, tall, slab-sided, two-fisted renegade son of Vermont, begging your pardon, who had gone through a regular apprenticeship in hardness and brutality, and taken his degree to be admitted to practice. My mother never could endure him, nor I, but he obtained an entire ascendancy over my father, and this man was the absolute despot of the estate. I was a little fellow then, but I had the same love that I have now for all kinds of human things, a kind of passion for the study of humanity, come in what shape it would. I was found in the cabins and among the field hands a great deal, and of course was a great favorite, and all sorts of complaints and grievances were breathed in my ear, and I told them to mother, and we, between us, formed a sort of committee for a redress of grievances. We hindered and repressed a great deal of cruelty, and congratulated ourselves on doing a vast deal of good, till, as often happens, my zeal overacted. Stubbs complained to my father that he couldn't manage the hands, and must resign his position. Father was a fond, indulgent husband, but a man that never flinched from anything that he thought necessary, and so he put down his foot, like a rock, between us and the field hands. He told my mother, in language perfectly respectful and deferential, but quite explicit, that over the house servants she should be entire mistress, but that with the field hands he could allow no interference. He revered and respected her above all living beings, but he would have said it all the same to the Virgin Mary herself, if she had come in the way of his system. I used sometimes to hear my mother reasoning cases with him, endeavoring to excite his sympathies. He would listen to the most pathetic appeals with the most discouraging politeness and equanimity. "It all resolves itself into this," he would say. "Must I part with Stubbs, or keep him? Stubbs is the soul of punctuality, honesty, and efficiency, a thorough business hand, and as humane as the general run. We can't have perfection, and if I keep him, I must sustain his administration as a whole, even if there are, now and then, things that are exceptionable. All government includes some necessary hardness. General rules will bear hard on particular cases." This last maxim my father seemed to consider a settler in most alleged cases of cruelty. After he had said that, he commonly drew up his feet on the sofa, like a man that had disposed of a business, and betook himself to a nap, or the newspaper, as the case might be. The fact is, my father showed the exact sort of talent for a statesman. He could have divided Poland as easily as an orange, or trod on Ireland as quietly and systematically as any man living. At last my mother gave up, in despair. It never will be known, till the last account, what noble and sensitive natures like hers have felt, cast, utterly helpless, into what seems to them an abyss of injustice and cruelty, and which seems so to nobody about them. It has been an age of long sorrow of such natures, in such a hell-begotten sort of world as ours. What remained for her but to train her children in her own views and sentiments? Well, after all you say about training, children will grow up substantially what they are by nature, and only that. From the cradle, Alfred was an aristocrat, and as he grew up, instinctively, all his sympathies and all his reasonings were in that line, and all mother's exhortations went to the winds. As to me, they sunk deep into me. She never contradicted in form anything my father said, or seemed directly to differ from him, but she impressed, burnt into my very soul, with all the force of her deep earnest nature, an idea of the dignity and worth of the meanest human soul. I have looked in her face with solemn awe, when she would point up to the stars in the evening and say to me, "See there, August, the poorest, meanest soul on our place will be living. When all these stars are gone forever, will live as long as God lives." She had some fine old paintings, one in particular, of Jesus healing a blind man. They were very fine, and used to impress me strongly. "See there, August," she would say, "the blind man was a beggar, poor and loathsome. Therefore he would not heal him afar off. He called him to him, and put his hands on him. Remember this, my boy." If I had lived to grow up under her care, she might have stimulated me to I know not what of enthusiasm. I might have been a saint, reformer, martyr. But alas, alas, I went from her when I was only 13, and I never saw her again. St. Clair rested his head on his hands, and did not speak for some minutes. After a while he looked up and went on. "What poor, mean trash this whole business of human virtue is! a mere matter for the most part of latitude and longitude, and geographical position, acting with natural temperament. The greater part is nothing but an accident. Your father, for example, settles in Vermont, in a town where all are in fact free and equal, becomes a regular church member and deacon, and in due time joins an abolition society, and thinks us all little better than heathens. Yet he is, for all the world, in constitution and habit, a duplicate of my father. I can see it leaking out in 50 different ways. Just the same strong, overbearing, dominant spirit. You know very well how impossible it is to persuade some of the folks in your village that Squire Sinclair does not feel above them. The fact is, though, he has fallen on democratic times, and embraced a democratic theory. He is to the heart an aristocrat as much as my father, who ruled over 500 or 600 slaves. Miss Ophelia felt rather disposed to cavil at this picture, and was laying down her knitting to begin, but St. Clair stopped her. "Now, I know every word you are going to say. I do not say they were alike in fact. One fell into a condition where everything acted against the natural tendency, and the other where everything acted for it. And so, one turned out a pretty willful, stout, overbearing old democrat, and the other a willful, stout old despot. If both had owned plantations in Louisiana, they would have been as alike as two old bullets cast in the same mold." "What an undutiful boy you are," said Miss Ophelia. "I don't mean them any disrespect," said St. Clair. "You know reverence is not my forte. But to go back to my story. When father died he left the whole property to us twin boys, to be divided as we should agree. There does not breathe on God's earth a nobler souled, more generous fellow than Alfred in all that concerns his equals, and we got on admirably with this property question without a single unbrotherly word or feeling. We undertook to work the plantation together, and Alfred, whose outward life and capabilities had double the strength of mine, became an enthusiastic planter, and a wonderfully successful one. But 2 years' trial satisfied me, and I could not be a partner in that matter. To have a great gang of 700 whom I could not know personally, or feel any individual interest in, bought and driven, housed, fed, worked like so many horned cattle, strained up to military precision, the question of how little of life's commonest enjoyments would keep them in working order being a constantly recurring problem, the necessity of drivers and overseers, the ever necessary whip, first, last, and only argument, the whole thing was insufferably disgusting and loathsome to me, and when I thought of my mother's estimate of one poor human soul, it became even frightful. It's all nonsense to talk to me about slaves enjoying all this. To this day I have no patience with the unutterable trash that some of your patronizing Northerners have made up, as in their zeal to apologize for our sins. We all know better. Tell me that any man living wants to work all his days, from day dawn till dark, under the constant eye of a master, without the power of putting forth one irresponsible volition on the same dreary, monotonous, unchanging toil, and all for 2 pairs of pantaloons and a pair of shoes a year, with enough food and shelter to keep him in working order. Any man who thinks that human beings can, as a general thing, be made about as comfortable that way as any other, I wish he might try it. I'd buy the dog, and work him, with a clear conscience." "I always have supposed," said Miss Ophelia, "that you, all of you, approved of these things and thought them right, according to Scripture." "Humbug! We are not quite reduced to that yet. Alfred, who is as determined a despot as ever walked, does not pretend to this kind of defense. No, he stands, high and haughty, on that good old respectable ground, the right of the strongest; and he says, and I think quite sensibly, that the American planter is only doing in another form what the English aristocracy and capitalists are doing by the lower classes; that is, I take it, appropriating them, body and bone, soul and spirit, to their use and convenience. He defends both, and I think at least consistently. He says that there can be no high civilization without enslavement of the masses, either nominal or real. There must, he says, be a lower class, given up to physical toil and confined to an animal nature; and a higher one thereby acquires leisure and wealth for a more expanded intelligence and improvement, and becomes the directing soul of the lower. So he reasons, because, as I said, he is born an aristocrat. So I don't believe, because I was born a democrat."
"How in the world can the two things be compared?" said Miss Ophelia. "The English laborer is not sold, traded, parted from his family, whipped."
"He is as much at the will of his employer as if he were sold to him. The slave owner can whip his refractory slave to death; the capitalist can starve him to death. As to family security, it is hard to say which is the worst, to have one's children sold, or see them starve to death at home."
"But it's no kind of apology for slavery, to prove that it isn't worse than some other bad thing."
"I didn't give it for one. Nay, I'll say, besides, that ours is the more bold and palpable infringement of human rights. Actually buying a man up like a horse, looking at his teeth, cracking his joints, and trying his paces, and then paying down for him; having spectaculars, breeders, traders, and brokers in human bodies and souls, sets the thing before the eyes of the civilized world in a more tangible form, though the thing done be, after all, in its nature the same. That is, appropriating one set of human beings to the use and improvement of another, without any regard to their own."
"I never thought of the matter in this light," said Miss Ophelia.
"Well, I've traveled in England some, and I've looked over a good many documents as to the state of their lower classes, and I really think there is no denying Alfred when he says that his slaves are better off than a large class of the population of England. You see, you must not infer from what I have told you that Alfred is what is called a hard master, for he isn't. He is despotic and unmerciful to insubordination. He would shoot a fellow down with as little remorse as he would shoot a buck, if he opposed him; but in general he takes a sort of pride in having his slaves comfortably fed and accommodated. When I was with him, I insisted that he should do something for their instruction; and to please me he did get a chaplain, and used to have them catechized Sunday, though I believe in his heart that he thought it would do about as much good to set a chaplain over his dogs and horses. And the fact is, that a mind stupefied and animalized by every bad influence from the hour of birth, spending the whole of every weekday in unreflecting toil, cannot be done much with by a few hours on Sunday. The teachers of Sunday schools among the manufacturing population of England, and among plantation hands in our country, could perhaps testify to the same result, there and here. Yet some striking exceptions there are among us, from the fact that the negro is naturally more impressible to religious sentiment than the white.
"Well," said Miss Ophelia, "how came you to give up your plantation life?"
"Well, we jogged on together some time, till Alfred saw plainly that I was no planter. He thought it absurd, after he had reformed and altered and improved everywhere to suit my notions, that I still remained unsatisfied. The fact was, it was, after all, the thing that I hated, the using these men and women, the perpetuation of all this ignorance, brutality, and vice, just to make money for me. Besides, I was always interfering in the details. Being myself one of the laziest of mortals, I had altogether too much fellow-feeling for the lazy; and when poor shiftless dogs put stones at the bottom of their cotton baskets to make them weigh heavier, or filled their sacks with dirt, with cotton at the top, it seemed so exactly like what I should do if I were they, I couldn't and wouldn't have them flogged for it. Well, of course there was an end of plantation discipline, and Alf and I came to about the same point that I and my respected father did years before. So he told me that I was a womanish sentimentalist, and would never do for business life, and advised me to take the bank stock and the New Orleans family mansion, and go to writing poetry, and let him manage the plantation. So we parted, and I came here.
"But why didn't you free your slaves?"
"Well, I wasn't up to that. To hold them as tools for money-making, I could not. Have them to help spend money, you know, didn't look quite so ugly to me. Some of them were old house-servants, to whom I was much attached, and the younger ones were children to the old. All were well satisfied to be as they were." He paused, and walked reflectively up and down the room. "There was," said St. Clair, "a time in my life when I had plans and hopes of doing something in this world more than to float and drift. I had vague, indistinct yearnings to be a sort of emancipator, to free my native land from this spot and stain. All young men have had such fever fits, I suppose, some time. But then—
"Why didn't you?" said Miss Ophelia. "You ought not to put your hand to the plow and look back."
Oh, well, things didn't go with me as I expected, and I got the despair of living that Solomon did. I suppose it was a necessary incident to wisdom in us both. But, somehow or other, instead of being actor and regenerator in society, I became a piece of driftwood, and have been floating and eddying about ever since. Alfred scolds me every time we meet, and he has the better of me, I grant, for he really does something. His life is a logical result of his opinions, and mine is a contemptible non sequitur.
"My dear cousin, can you be satisfied with such a way of spending your probation?"
Satisfied? Was I not just telling you I despised it? But then, to come back to this point, we were on this liberation business. I don't think my feelings about slavery are peculiar. I find many men who in their hearts think of it just as I do. The land groans under it, and, bad as it is for the slave, it is worse, if anything, for the master. It takes no spectacles to see that a great class of vicious, improvident, degraded people among us are an evil to us, as well as to themselves. The capitalist and aristocrat of England cannot feel that as we do, because they do not mingle with the class they degrade as we do. They are in our homes, they are the associates of our children, and they form their minds faster than we can, for they are a race that children always will cling to and assimilate with. If Eva, now, was not more angel than ordinary, she would be ruined. We might as well allow the smallpox to run among them, and think our children would not take it, as to let them be uninstructed and vicious, and think our children will not be affected by that. Yet our laws positively and utterly forbid any efficient general educational system, and they do it wisely, too, for just begin and thoroughly educate one generation, and the whole thing would be blown sky high. If we did not give them liberty, they would take it.
"And what do you think will be the end of this?" said Miss Ophelia.
I don't know. One thing is certain, that there is a mustering among the masses the world over, and there is a dies irae coming on sooner or later. The same thing is working in Europe, in England, and in this country. My mother used to tell me of a millennium that was coming, when Christ should reign and all men should be free and happy, and she taught me, when I was a boy, to pray, "Thy kingdom come." Sometimes I think all this sighing and groaning and stirring among the dry bones foretells what she used to tell me was coming. But who may abide the day of his appearing?
"Augustine, sometimes I think you are not far from the kingdom," said Miss Ophelia, laying down her knitting and looking anxiously at her cousin.
Thank you for your good opinion, but it's up and down with me, up to heaven's gate in theory, down in earth's dust in practice. But there's the tea-bell. Do let's go. And don't say now I haven't had one downright serious talk, for once in my life. At table, Marie alluded to the incident of Prue.
"I suppose you'll think, cousin," she said, "that we are all barbarians."
"I think that's a barbarous thing," said Miss Ophelia,
"but I don't think you are all barbarians." "Well, now," said Marie, "I know it's impossible to get along with some of these creatures. They are so bad they ought not to live. I don't feel a particle of sympathy for such cases. If they'd only behave themselves, it would not happen." "But, mamma," said Eva, "the poor creature was unhappy. That's what made her drink." "Oh, fiddlestick! As if that were any excuse. I'm unhappy very often. I presume," she said pensively, "that I've had greater trials than ever she had. It's just because they are so bad. There's some of them that you cannot break in by any kind of severity. I remember father had a man that was so lazy he would run away just to get rid of work, and lie round in the swamps, stealing and doing all sorts of horrid things. That man was caught and whipped, time and again, and it never did him any good. And the last time he crawled off, though he couldn't but just go, and died in the swamp. There was no sort of reason for it, for father's hands were always treated kindly." "I broke a fellow in once," said St. Clair, "that all the overseers and masters had tried their hands on in vain." "You?" said Marie. Well, I'd be glad to know when you ever did anything of the sort.
Well, he was a powerful, gigantic fellow, a native-born African, and he appeared to have the rude instinct of freedom in him to an uncommon degree. He was a regular African lion. They called him Scipio. Nobody could do anything with him, and he was sold round from overseer to overseer, till at last Alfred bought him because he thought he could manage him. Well, one day he knocked down the overseer and was fairly off into the swamps. I was on a visit to Alf's plantation, for it was after we had dissolved partnership. Alfred was greatly exasperated, but I told him that it was his own fault, and laid him any wager that I could break the man, and finally it was agreed that, if I caught him, I should have him to experiment on. So they mustered out a party of some 6 or 7 with guns and dogs for the hunt. People, you know, can get up as much enthusiasm in hunting a man as a deer, if it is only customary. In fact, I got a little excited myself, though I had only put in as a sort of mediator in case he was caught. Well, the dogs bayed and howled, and we rode and scampered, and finally we started him. He ran and bounded like a buck, and kept us well in the rear for some time, but at last he got caught in an impenetrable thicket of cane. Then he turned to bay, and I tell you he fought the dogs right gallantly. He dashed them to right and left, and actually killed 3 of them with only his naked fist, when a shot from a gun brought him down, and he fell, wounded and bleeding, almost at my feet. The poor fellow looked up at me, with manhood and despair both in his eye. I kept back the dogs and the party, as they came pressing up, and claimed him as my prisoner. It was all I could do to keep them from shooting him in the flush of success, but I persisted in my bargain, and Alfred sold him to me. Well, I took him in hand, and in 1 fortnight I had him tamed down as submissive and tractable as heart could desire.
What in the world did you do to him? Said Marie.
Well, it was quite a simple process. I took him to my own room, had a good bed made for him, dressed his wounds, and tended him myself until he got fairly on his feet again, and, in process of time, I had free papers made out for him, and told him he might go where he liked.
And did he go? Said Miss Ophelia.
No. The foolish fellow tore the paper in 2, and absolutely refused to leave me. I never had a braver, better fellow, trusty and true as steel. He embraced Christianity afterwards, and became as gentle as a child. He used to oversee my place on the lake, and did it capitally, too. I lost him the first cholera season. In fact, he laid down his life for me, for I was sick almost to death, and when, through the panic, everybody else fled, Scipio worked for me like a giant, and actually brought me back into life again. But, poor fellow, he was taken right after, and there was no saving him. I never felt anybody's loss more. Eva had come gradually nearer and nearer to her father as he told the story, her small lips apart, her eyes wide and earnest with absorbing interest. As he finished, she suddenly threw her arms around his neck, burst into tears, and sobbed convulsively.
Eva, dear child, what is the matter? Said St. Clair, as the child's small frame trembled and shook with the violence of her feelings. This child, he added, ought not to hear any of this kind of thing. She's nervous. No, Papa, I'm not nervous, said Eva, controlling herself suddenly, with a strength of resolution singular in such a child. I'm not nervous, but these things sink into my heart.
What do you mean, Eva?
I can't tell you, Papa. I think a great many thoughts. Perhaps some day I shall tell you.
Well, think away, dear. Only don't cry and worry your papa, said St. Clair. Look here. See what a beautiful peach I have got for you. Eva took it and smiled, though there was still a nervous twitching about the corners of her mouth. Come, look at the goldfish, said St. Clair, taking her hand and stepping onto the veranda. A few moments, and merry laughs were heard through the silken curtains, as Eva and St. Clair were pelting each other with roses, and chasing each other among the alleys of the court. There is danger that our humble friend Tom be neglected amid the adventures of the higher born, but if our readers will accompany us up to a little loft over the stable, they may perhaps learn a little of his affairs. It was a decent room, containing a bed, a chair, and a small rough stand, where lay Tom's Bible and hymn book, and where he sits at present with his slate before him, intent on something that seems to cost him a great deal of anxious thought. The fact was, that Tom's home yearnings had become so strong that he had begged a sheet of writing paper of Eva, and, mustering up all his small stock of literary attainment, acquired by Massa George's instructions, he conceived the bold idea of writing a letter, and he was busy now, on his slate, getting out his first draft. Tom was in a good deal of trouble, for the forms of some of the letters he had forgotten entirely, and of what he did remember he did not know exactly what to use. And while he was working, and breathing very hard in his earnestness, Eva alighted, like a bird, on the round of his chair behind him, and peeped over his shoulder.
"Oh, Uncle Tom, what funny things you are making there!"
"I'm trying to write to my poor old woman, Miss Eva, and my little children," said Tom, drawing the back of his hand over his eyes, "but somehow I'm feared I shan't make it out."
"I wish I could help you, Tom. I've learned to write some. Last year I could make all the letters, but I'm afraid I've forgotten."
So Eva put her golden head close to his, and the two commenced a grave and anxious discussion, each one equally earnest, and about equally ignorant, and with a deal of consulting and advising over every word, the composition began, as they both felt very sanguine, to look quite like writing.
"Yes, Uncle Tom, it really begins to look beautiful," said Eva, gazing delightedly on it. "How pleased your wife will be, and the poor little children. Oh, it's a shame you ever had to go away from them. I mean to ask papa to let you go back some time."
"Mrs. said that she would send down money for me as soon as they could get it together," said Tom. "I'm 'specting she will. Young Massa George, he said he'd come for me, and he gave me this yer dollar as a sign." And Tom drew from under his clothes the precious dollar.
"Oh, he'll certainly come, then," said Eva. "I'm so glad."
"And I wanted to send a letter, to let him know where I was, and tell poor Chloe that I was well off, 'cause she felt so drefful, poor soul." "I say, Tom," said St. Clair's voice, coming in the door at this moment. Tom and Eva both started. "What's here?" said St. Clair, coming up and looking at the slate.
"Oh, it's Tom's letter. I'm helping him to write it," said Eva. "Isn't it nice?"
"I wouldn't discourage either of you," said St. Clair, "but I rather think, Tom, you'd better get me to write your letter for you. I'll do it when I come home from my ride."
"It's very important he should write," said Eva, "because his mistress is going to send down money to redeem him, you know, papa. He told me they told him so."
St. Clair thought in his heart that this was probably only one of those things which good-natured owners say to their servants, to alleviate their horror of being sold, without any intention of fulfilling the expectation thus excited. But he did not make any audible comment upon it, only ordered Tom to get the horses out for a ride. Tom's letter was written in due form for him that evening, and safely lodged in the post-office. Miss Ophelia still persevered in her labors in the housekeeping line. It was universally agreed among all the household, from Dinah down to the youngest urchin, that Miss Ophelia was decidedly curous, a term by which a Southern servant implies that his or her betters don't exactly suit them. The higher circle in the family, to wit, Adolphe, Jane, and Rosa, agreed that she was no lady. Ladies never keep working about as she did. That she had no air at all, and they were surprised that she should be any relation of the St. Clairs. Even Marie declared that it was absolutely fatiguing to see Cousin Ophelia always so busy. And, in fact, Miss Ophelia's industry was so incessant as to lay some foundation for the complaint. She sewed and stitched away from daylight till dark, with the energy of one who is pressed on by some immediate urgency, and then, when the light faded, and the work was folded away, with one turn-out came the ever-ready knitting work, and there she was again, going on as briskly as ever. It really was a labor to see her. End of chapter 19. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, Chapter 20, Topsy. One morning, while Miss Ophelia was busy in some of her domestic cares, St. Clair's voice was heard, calling her at the foot of the stairs. "Come down here, cousin. I've something to show you." "What is it?" said Miss Ophelia, coming down with her sewing in her hand. "I've made a purchase for your department. See here," said St. Clair, and with that word he pulled along a little negro girl about 8 or 9 years of age. She was one of the blackest of her race, and her round shining eyes, glittering as glass beads, moved with quick and restless glances over everything in the room. Her mouth, half open with astonishment at the wonders of the new master's parlor, displayed a white and brilliant set of teeth. Her woolly hair was braided in sundry little tails, which stuck out in every direction. The expression of her face was an odd mixture of shrewdness and cunning, over which was oddly drawn, like a kind of veil, an expression of the most doleful gravity and solemnity. She was dressed in a single filthy, ragged garment made of bagging, and stood with her hands demurely folded before her. Altogether there was something odd and goblin-like about her appearance, something, as Miss Ophelia afterwards said, so heathenish as to inspire that good lady with utter dismay, and turning to St. Clair she said, "Augustine, what in the world have you brought that thing here for?" "For you to educate, to be sure, and train in the way she should go. I thought she was rather a funny specimen in the Jim Crow line. Here, Topsy," he added, giving a whistle, as a man would to call the attention of a dog, "give us a song now, and show us some of your dancing." The black, glassy eyes glittered with a kind of wicked drollery, and the thing struck up, in a clear, shrill voice, an odd negro melody, to which she kept time with her hands and feet, spinning round, clapping her hands, knocking her knees together in a wild, fantastic sort of time, and producing in her throat all those odd guttural sounds which distinguish the native music of her race. And finally, turning a somerset or two, and giving a prolonged closing note, as odd and unearthly as that of a steam whistle, she came suddenly down on the carpet, and stood with her hands folded, and a most sanctimonious expression of meekness and solemnity over her face, only broken by the cunning glances which she shot askance from the corners of her eyes. Miss Ophelia stood silent, perfectly paralyzed with amazement. St. Clair, like a mischievous fellow as he was, appeared to enjoy her astonishment, and, addressing the child again, said, "Topsy, this is your new mistress. I'm going to give you up to her. See now that you behave yourself."
"Yes, massa,"
said Topsy, with sanctimonious gravity, her wicked eyes twinkling as she spoke. "You're going to be good, Topsy, you understand?" said St. Clair.
"Oh, yes, massa,"
said Topsy with another twinkle, her hands still devoutly folded.
"Now, Augustine, what upon earth is this for?" said Miss Ophelia. "Your house is so full of these little plagues now that a body can't set down their foot without treading on 'em. I get up in the morning and find one asleep behind the door, and see one black head poking out from under the table, one lying on the door-mat, and they are moping and mowing and grinning between all the railings, and tumbling over the kitchen floor. What on earth did you want to bring this one for?"
"For you to educate, didn't I tell you? You're always preaching about educating. I thought I would make you a present of a fresh-caught specimen, and let you try your hand on her, and bring her up in the way she should go."
"I don't want her, I am sure. I have more to do with 'em now than I want to."
"That's you Christians all over. You'll get up a society, and get some poor missionary to spend all his days among just such heathen. But let me see one of you that would take one into your house with you, and take the labor of their conversion on yourselves. No, when it comes to that, they are dirty and disagreeable, and it's too much care, and so on."
"Augustine, you know I didn't think of it in that light," said Miss Ophelia, evidently softening.
"Well, it might be a real missionary work," said she, looking rather more favorably on the child. St. Clair had touched the right string. Miss Ophelia's conscientiousness was ever on the alert. "But," she added, "I really didn't see the need of buying this one. There are enough now in your house to take all my time and skill." "Well, then, cousin," said St. Clair, drawing her aside, "I ought to beg your pardon for my good-for-nothing speeches. You are so good, after all, that there's no sense in them. Why, the fact is, this concern belonged to a couple of drunken creatures that keep a low restaurant that I have to pass by every day, and I was tired of hearing her screaming, and them beating and swearing at her. She looked bright and funny, too, as if something might be made of her. So I bought her, and I'll give her to you. Try, now, and give her a good orthodox New England bringing up, and see what it'll make of her. You know I haven't any gift that way, but I'd like you to try."
"Well, I'll do what I can,"
said Miss Ophelia, and she approached her new subject very much as a person might be supposed to approach a black spider, supposing them to have benevolent designs toward it.
"She's dreadfully dirty and half naked," she said.
"Well, take her downstairs, and make some of them clean and clothe her up." Miss Ophelia carried her to the kitchen regions.
"Don't see what Massa and St. Clair wants of another nigger," said Dinah, surveying the new arrival with no friendly air. "Won't have her round under my feet, I know."
"Pa," said Rosa and Jane, with supreme disgust, "let her keep out of our way. What in the world Massa want another of these low niggers for, I can't see."
"You go 'long. No more nigger than you be, Miss Rosa," said Dinah, who felt this last remark a reflection on herself. "You seem t'ink yourself white folks. You ain't never one black nor white. I'd like to be one or t'other."
Miss Ophelia saw that there was nobody in the camp that would undertake to oversee the cleansing and dressing of the new arrival, and so she was forced to do it herself, with some very ungracious and reluctant assistance from Jane. It is not for ears polite to hear the particulars of the first toilet of a neglected, abused child. In fact, in this world, multitudes must live and die in a state that it would be too great a shock to the nerves of their fellow mortals even to hear described. Miss Ophelia had a good, strong, practical deal of resolution, and she went through all the disgusting details with heroic thoroughness, though it must be confessed with no very gracious air, for endurance was the utmost to which her principles could bring her. When she saw, on the back and shoulders of the child, great welts and calloused spots, ineffaceable marks of the system under which she had grown up thus far, her heart became pitiful within her.
"See there," said Jane, pointing to the marks. "Don't that show she's a limb? We'll have fine works with her, I reckon. I hate these nigger young'uns, so disgusting. I wonder that Massa would buy her."
The young'un alluded to heard all these comments with a subdued and doleful air which seemed habitual to her, only scanning, with a keen and furtive glance of her flickering eyes, the ornaments which Jane wore in her ears. When arrayed at last in a suit of decent and whole clothing, her hair cropped short to her head, Miss Ophelia, with some satisfaction, said she looked more Christian-like than she did, and in her own mind began to mature some plans for her instruction. Sitting down before her, she began to question her.
"How old are you, Topsy?" "Dunno, missus,"
said the image, with a grin that showed all her teeth.
"Don't know how old you are? Didn't anybody ever tell you? Who was your mother?" "Never had none," said the child, with another grin. "Never had any mother? What do you mean? Where were you born?" "Never was born," persisted Topsy, with another grin that looked so goblin-like that, if Miss Ophelia had been at all nervous, she might have fancied that she had got hold of some sooty gnome from the land of diablerie. But Miss Ophelia was not nervous, but plain and businesslike, and she said, with some sternness, "You mustn't answer me in that way, child. I'm not playing with you. Tell me where you were born, and who your father and mother were." "Never was born," reiterated the creature more emphatically. "Never had no father nor mother nor nothing. I was raised by a speculator, with lots of others. Old Aunt Sue used to take care on us."
The child was evidently sincere, and Jane, breaking into a short laugh, said,
"Laws, missus, there's heaps of 'em. Speculators buys 'em up cheap, when they's little, and gets 'em raised for market."
"How long have you lived with your master and mistress?"
"Don't know, missus."
"Is it a year, or more, or less?"
"Don't know, missus." "Laws, missus, those low negroes, they can't tell. They don't know anything about time," said Jane. "They don't know what a year is. They don't know their own ages."
"Have you ever heard anything about God, Topsy?" The child looked bewildered, but grinned as usual. "Do you know who made you?"
"Nobody as I knows on,"
said the child, with a short laugh. The idea appeared to amuse her considerably, for her eyes twinkled, and she added,
I 'spect I'd growed. Don't think nobody never made me."
"Do you know how to sew?" said Ophelia, who thought she would turn her inquiries to something more tangible.
"No, missus."
"What can you do? What did you do for your master and mistress?"
"Fetch water, and wash dishes, and rub knives, and wait on folks."
"Were they good to you?"
"'Spect they was,"
said the child, scanning Miss Ophelia cunningly. Miss Ophelia rose from this encouraging colloquy. St. Clair was leaning over the back of her chair. "You find virgin soil there, cousin. Put in your own ideas. You won't find many to pull up." Miss Ophelia's ideas of education, like all her other ideas, were very set and definite, and of the kind that prevailed in New England a century ago, and which are still preserved in some very retired and unsophisticated parts where there are no railroads. As nearly as could be expressed, they could be comprised in very few words: to teach them to mind when they were spoken to teach them the catechism, sewing and reading, and to whip them if they told lies. And though, of course, in the flood of light that is now poured on education, these are left far away in the rear, yet it is an undisputed fact that our grandmothers raised some tolerably fair men and women under this regime, as many of us can remember and testify. At all events, Miss Ophelia knew of nothing else to do, and therefore applied her mind to her heathen with the best diligence she could command. The child was announced and considered in the family as Miss Ophelia's girl, and, as she was looked upon with no gracious eye in the kitchen, Miss Ophelia resolved to confine her sphere of operation and instruction chiefly to her own chamber. With a self-sacrifice which some of our readers will appreciate, she resolved, instead of comfortably making her own bed, sweeping and dusting her own chamber, which she had hitherto done, in utter scorn of all offers of help from the chambermaid of the establishment, to condemn herself to the martyrdom of instructing Topsy to perform these operations. Ah, woe the day! Did any of our readers ever do the same, they will appreciate the amount of her self-sacrifice. Miss Ophelia began with Topsy by taking her into her chamber the first morning, and solemnly commencing a course of instruction in the art and mystery of bed-making. Behold, then, Topsy, washed and shorn of all the little braided tails wherein her heart had delighted, arrayed in a clean gown, with well-starched apron, standing reverently before Miss Ophelia, with an expression of solemnity well befitting a funeral.
"Now, Topsy, I'm going to show you just how my bed is to be made. I am very particular about my bed. You must learn exactly how to do it." "Yes, ma'am,"
said Topsy, with a deep sigh and a face of woeful earnestness.
"Now, Topsy, look here. This is the hem of the sheet. This is the right side of the sheet, and this is the wrong. Will you remember?" "Yes, ma'am," said Topsy, with another sigh. "Well, now, the under sheet you must bring over the bolster, so, and tuck it clear down under the mattress nice and smooth, so. Do you see?" "Yes, ma'am," said Topsy, with profound attention. "But the upper sheet," said Miss Ophelia, "must be brought down in this way, and tucked under firm and smooth at the foot, so. The narrow hem at the foot." "Yes, ma'am," said Topsy, as before. But we will add, what Miss Ophelia did not see, that during the time when the good lady's back was turned in the zeal of her manipulations, the young disciple had contrived to snatch a pair of gloves and a ribbon, which she had adroitly slipped into her sleeves, and stood with her hands dutifully folded as before. "Now, Topsy, let's see you do this," said Miss Ophelia, pulling off the clothes and seating herself. Topsy, with great gravity and adroitness, went through the exercise completely to Miss Ophelia's satisfaction, smoothing the sheets, patting out every wrinkle, and exhibiting through the whole process a gravity and seriousness with which her instructress was greatly edified. By an unlucky slip, however, a fluttering fragment of the ribbon hung out of one of her sleeves just as she was finishing, and caught Miss Ophelia's attention. Instantly she pounced upon it. "What's this, you naughty wicked child? You've been stealing this." The ribbon was pulled out of Topsy's own sleeve, yet was she not in the least disconcerted. She only looked at it with an air of the most surprised and unconscious innocence. "Laws, why, that ar's Miss Feely's ribbon, ain't it? How could it 'a got caught in my sleeve?"
Topsy, you naughty girl, don't you tell me a lie. You stole that ribbon." "Missus, I declare for it I didn't. Never seed it till this yer blessed minute."
"Topsy," said Miss Ophelia, "don't you know it's wicked to tell lies?"
"I never tell no lies, Miss Feely," said Topsy with virtuous gravity. "It's just the truth I've been a-telling now, and ain't nothing else."
"Topsy, I shall have to whip you if you tell lies so."
"Laws, missus, if you's to whip all day, couldn't say no other way," said Topsy, beginning to blubber. "I never seed that. It must 'a' got caught in my sleeve. Miss Feely must 'a' left it on the bed, and it got caught in the clothes, and so got in my sleeve."
Miss Ophelia was so indignant at the bare-faced lie that she caught the child and shook her. "Don't you tell me that again!" The shake brought the glove on the floor from the other sleeve. "There, you!" said Miss Ophelia. "Will you tell me now you didn't steal the ribbons?" Topsy now confessed to the gloves, but still persisted in denying the ribbon. "Now, Topsy," said Miss Ophelia, "if you'll confess all about it, I won't whip you this time." Thus adjured, Topsy confessed to the ribbon and gloves, with woeful protestations of penitence. "Well, now tell me. I know you must have taken other things since you have been in the house, for I let you run about all day yesterday. Now tell me if you took anything, and I shan't whip you."
"Laws, missus, I took Miss Eva's red thing she wears on her neck."
"You did, you naughty child. Well, what else?"
"I took Rosa's ear-rings, them red ones."
"Go bring them to me this minute, both of them."
"Laws, missus, I can't. They's burnt up."
"Burnt up? What a story! Go get 'em, or I'll whip you." Topsy, with loud protestations, and tears and groans, declared that she could not.
"They's burnt up, they was."
"What did you burn 'em for?" said Miss Ophelia.
"'Cause I's wicked, I is. I's mighty wicked, anyhow. I can't help it."
Just at this moment Eva came innocently into the room with the identical coral necklace on her neck.
"Why, Eva, where did you get your necklace?" said Miss Ophelia. "Get it? Why, I've had it on all day," said Eva.
"Did you have it on yesterday?"
"Yes, and what is funny, Auntie, I had it on all night. I forgot to take it off when I went to bed."
Miss Ophelia looked perfectly bewildered. The more so, as Rosa, at that instant, came into the room with a basket of newly ironed linen poised on her head, and the coral eardrops shaking in her ears.
"I'm sure I can't tell anything what to do with such a child," she said in despair. "What in the world did you tell me you took those things for, Topsy?" "Why, missus said I must fess, and I couldn't think of nothing else to fess," said Topsy, rubbing her eyes.
"But, of course, I didn't want you to confess things you didn't do," said Miss Ophelia. "That's telling a lie just as much as the other."
"Laws, now is it?"
said Topsy, with an air of innocent wonder.
"La, there ain't any such thing as truth in that limb,"
said Rosa, looking indignantly at Topsy.
"If I was Massa St. Clair, I'd whip her till the blood run, I would. I'd let her catch it."
"No, no, Rosa,"
said Eva, with an air of command, which the child could assume at times.
"You mustn't talk so, Rosa. I can't bear to hear it."
"Law sakes, Miss Eva, you's so good you don't know nothing how to get along with niggers. There's no way but to cut 'em well up, I tell you."
"Rosa," said Eva, "hush! Don't you say another word of that sort."
And the eye of the child flashed, and her cheek deepened its color. Rosa was cowed in a moment.
"Miss Eva has got the St. Clair blood in her, that's plain. She can speak for all the world just like her papa," she said as she passed out of the room.
Eva stood looking at Topsy. There stood the two children, representatives of the two extremes of society: the fair, high-bred child with her golden head, her deep eyes, her spiritual, noble brow, and prince-like movements, and her black, keen, subtle, cringing, yet acute neighbor. They stood the representatives of their races: the Saxon, born of ages of cultivation, command, education, physical and moral eminence, and the Afric, born of ages of oppression, submission, ignorance, toil, and vice. Something, perhaps, of such thoughts struggled through Eva's mind, but a child's thoughts are rather dim, undefined instincts, and in Eva's noble nature many such were yearning and working, for which she had no power of utterance. When Miss Ophelia expatiated on Topsy's naughty, wicked conduct, The child looked perplexed and sorrowful, but said sweetly,
Poor Topsy, why need you steal? You're going to be taken good care of now. I'm sure I'd rather give you anything of mine than have you steal it.
It was the first word of kindness the child had ever heard in her life, and the sweet tone and manner struck strangely on the wide, rude heart, and a sparkle of something like a tear shone in the keen, round, glittering eye. But it was followed by the short laugh and habitual grin. No, the ear that has never heard anything but abuse is strangely incredulous of anything so heavenly as kindness. And Topsy only thought Eva's speech something funny and inexplicable. She did not believe it. But what was to be done with Topsy? Miss Ophelia found the case a puzzler. Her rules for bringing up didn't seem to apply. She thought she would take time to think of it, and by the way of gaining time, and in hopes of some indefinite moral virtues supposed to be inherent in dark closets, Miss Ophelia shut Topsy up in one till she had arranged her ideas further on the subject.
I don't see, said Miss Ophelia to St. Clair, how I'm going to manage that child without whipping her.
Well, whip her, then, to your heart's content. I'll give you full power to do what you like.
Children always have to be whipped, said Miss Ophelia. I never heard of bringing them up without.
Oh, well, certainly, said St. Clair. Do as you think best. Only I'll make one suggestion. I've seen this child whipped with a poker, knocked down with a shovel or tongs, whichever came handiest, etc., and seeing that she is used to that style of operation, I think your whippings will have to be pretty energetic to make much impression.
What is to be done with her, then? Said Miss Ophelia.
You have started a serious question, said St. Clair. I wish you'd answer it. What is to be done with a human being that can be governed only by the lash? That fails. It's a very common state of things down here.
I'm sure I don't know. I never saw such a child as this.
Such children are very common among us, and such men and women, too. How are they to be governed? Said St. Clair.
I'm sure it's more than I can say, said Miss Ophelia.
Or I either, said St. Clair. The horrid cruelties and outrages that once in a while find their way into the papers, such cases as Prue's, for example, what do they come from? In many cases it is a gradual hardening process on both sides, the owner growing more and more cruel, as the servant more and more callous. Whipping and abuse are like laudanum. You have to double the dose as the sensibilities decline. I saw this very early when I became an owner, and I resolved never to begin, because I did not know when I should stop, and I resolved at least to protect my own moral nature. The consequence is that my servants act like spoiled children, but I think that better than for us both to be brutalized together. You have talked a great deal about our responsibilities in educating, cousin. I really wanted you to try with one child, who is a specimen of thousands among us.
It is your system makes such children, said Miss Ophelia.
I know it, but they are made, they exist, and what is to be done with them?
Well, I can't say I thank you for the experiment, but then, as it appears to be a duty, I shall persevere and try, and do the best I can, said Miss Ophelia.
And Miss Ophelia, after this, did labor with a commendable degree of zeal and energy on her new subject. She instituted regular hours and employments for her, and undertook to teach her to read and sew. In the former art the child was quick enough. She learned her letters as if by magic, and was very soon able to read plain reading. But the sewing was a more difficult matter. The creature was as lithe as a cat, and as active as a monkey, and the confinement of sewing was her abomination. So she broke her needles, threw them slyly out of the window, or down in chinks of the walls. She tangled, broke, and dirtied her thread, or, with a sly movement, would throw a spool away altogether. Her motions were almost as quick as those of a practised conjurer, and her command of her face quite as great, and though Miss Ophelia could not help feeling that so many accidents could not possibly happen in succession, yet she could not, without a watchfulness which would leave her no time for anything else, detect her. Topsy was soon a noted character in the establishment. Her talent for every species of drollery, grimace, and mimicry, for dancing, tumbling, climbing, singing, whistling, imitating every sound that hit her fancy, seemed inexhaustible. In her play hours she invariably had every child in the establishment at her heels, open-mouthed with admiration and wonder, not excepting Miss Eva, who appeared to be fascinated by her wild diablerie, as a dove is sometimes charmed by a glittering serpent. Miss Ophelia was uneasy that Eva should fancy Topsy's society so much, and implored St. Clair to forbid it. "Pooh, let the child alone," said St. Clair. "Topsy will do her good."
"But so depraved a child! Are you not afraid she will teach her some mischief?"
"She can't teach her mischief. She might teach it to some children, but evil rolls off Eva's mind like dew off a cabbage leaf. Not a drop sinks in."
"Don't be too sure," said Miss Ophelia. "I know I'd never let a child of mine play with Topsy."
"Well, your children needn't," said St. Clair, "but mine may. If Eva could have been spoiled, it would have been done years ago." Topsy was at first despised and contemned by the upper servants. They soon found reason to alter their opinion. It was very soon discovered that whoever cast an indignity on Topsy was sure to meet with some inconvenient accident shortly after. Either a pair of earrings or some cherished trinket would be missing, or an article of dress would be suddenly found utterly ruined, or the person would stumble accidentally into a pail of hot water, or a libation of dirty slop would unaccountably deluge them from above when in full gala dress; and on all these occasions, when investigation was made, there was nobody found to stand sponsor for the indignity. Topsy was cited and had up before all the domestic judicatories, time and again, but always sustained her examinations with most edifying innocence and gravity of appearance. Nobody in the world ever doubted who did the things, but not a scrap of any direct evidence could be found to establish the suppositions, and Miss Ophelia was too just to feel at liberty to proceed to any length without it. The mischiefs done were always so nicely timed, also, as further to shelter the aggressor. Thus the times for revenge on Rosa and Jane, the two chambermaids, were always chosen in those seasons when, as not unfrequently happened, they were in disgrace with their mistress, when any complaint from them would of course meet with no sympathy. In short, Topsy soon made the household understand the propriety of letting her alone, and she was let alone accordingly. Topsy was smart and energetic in all manual operations, learning everything that was taught her with surprising quickness. With a few lessons she had learned to do the proprieties of Miss Ophelia's chamber in a way with which even that particular lady could find no fault. Mortal hands could not lay spread smoother, adjust pillows more accurately, sweep and dust and arrange more perfectly than Topsy when she chose, but she didn't very often choose. If Miss Ophelia, after 3 or 4 days of careful patient supervision, was so sanguine as to suppose that Topsy had at last fallen into her way, could do without overlooking, and so go off and busy herself about something else. Topsy would hold a perfect carnival of confusion for some 1 or 2 hours. Instead of making the bed, she would amuse herself with pulling off the pillow-cases, butting her woolly head among the pillows, till it would sometimes be grotesquely ornamented with feathers sticking out in various directions. She would climb the posts, and hang head downward from the tops, flourish the sheets and spreads all over the apartment, dress the bolster up in Miss Ophelia's night-clothes, and enact various performances with that, singing and whistling and making grimaces at herself in the looking-glass. In short, as Miss Ophelia phrased it, raising Cain generally. On one occasion Miss Ophelia found Topsy with her very best scarlet India Canton crape shawl wound round her head for a turban, going on with her rehearsals before the glass in great style. Miss Ophelia having, with carelessness most unheard of in her, left the key, for once, in her drawer.
"Topsy,"
she would say, when at the end of all patience,
"what does make you act so?" "Dunno, missus. I spect 'cause I so wicked." "I don't know anything what I shall do with you, Topsy." "Law, missus, you must whip me. My old missus allers whip me. I ain't used to work unless I gets whipped." "Why, Topsy, I don't want to whip you. You can do well, if you've a mind to. What is the reason you won't?" "Laws, missus, I used to whipping. I spects it's good for me." Miss Ophelia tried the recipe.
and Topsy invariably made a terrible commotion, screaming, groaning, and imploring, though half an hour afterwards, when roosted on some projection of the balcony, and surrounded by a flock of admiring young uns, she would express the utmost contempt of the whole affair.
Law, Miss Feely Whip wouldn't kill a skeeter, her whippings. Oughter see how old Massa made the flesh fly. Old Massa knowed how.
Topsy always made great capital of her own sins and enormities, evidently considering them as something peculiarly distinguishing.
Law, you niggers, she would say to some of her auditors, does you know you's all sinners? Well, you is, everybody is. White folks is sinners, too. Miss Feely says so, but I spects niggers is the biggest ones. But, Lord, you ain't any on you up to me. I's so awful wicked, there can't nobody do nothing with me. I used to keep old missus swearing at me half the time. I spect I's the wickedest critter in the world.
And Topsy would cut a somerset and come up brusque and shining on a higher perch, and evidently plume herself on the distinction. Miss Ophelia busied herself very earnestly on Sundays, teaching Topsy the catechism. Topsy had an uncommon verbal memory, and committed with a fluency that greatly encouraged her instructress. "What good do you expect it is going to do her?" said St. Clair.
Why, it always has done children good. It's what children always have to learn, you know, said Miss Ophelia.
"Understand it or not," said St. Clair.
Oh, children never understand it at the time, but after they are grown up, it'll come to them.
"Mine hasn't come to me yet," said St. Clair, "though I'll bear testimony that you put it into me pretty thoroughly when I was a boy."
Ah, you were always good at learning, Augustine. I used to have great hopes of you, said Miss Ophelia.
"Well, haven't you now?" said St. Clair.
"I wish you were as good as you were when you were a boy, Augustine."
"So do I, that's a fact, cousin," said St. Clair. "Well, go ahead and catechize, Topsy. Maybe you'll make out something yet." Topsy, who had stood like a black statue during this discussion, with hands decently folded, now at a signal from Miss Ophelia went on.
"Our first parents, being left to the freedom of their own will, fell from the state wherein they were created."
Topsy's eyes twinkled, and she looked inquiringly.
"What is it, Topsy?" said Miss Ophelia. "Please, missus, was dat our state Kentuck?"
"What state, Topsy?"
"Dat state they fell out of. I used to hear Massa tell how we came down from Kentuck."
St. Clair laughed. "You'll have to give her a meaning, or she'll make one," said he. "There seems to be a theory of emigration suggested there."
"Oh, Augustine, be still," said Miss Ophelia. "How can I do anything if you will be laughing?"
"Well, I won't disturb the exercises again, on my honor." And St. Clair took his paper into the parlor and sat down till Topsy had finished her recitations. They were all very well, only that now and then she would oddly transpose some important words, and persist in the mistake, in spite of every effort to the contrary. And St. Clair, after all his promises of goodness, took a wicked pleasure in these mistakes, calling Topsy to him whenever he had a mind to amuse himself, and getting her to repeat the offending passages, in spite of Miss Ophelia's remonstrances.
"How do you think I can do anything with the child if you will go on so, Augustine?" she would say.
"Well, it is too bad. I won't again, but I do like to hear the droll little image stumble over those big words."
"But you confirm her in the wrong way."
"What's the odds? One word is as good as another to her."
"You wanted me to bring her up right, and you ought to remember she is a reasonable creature, and be careful of your influence over her."
"Oh, dismal! So I ought. But as Topsy herself says,
"I's so wicked."
In very much this way Topsy's training proceeded, for a year or two, Miss Ophelia worrying herself from day to day with her as a kind of chronic plague, to whose inflictions she became, in time, as accustomed as persons sometimes do to the neuralgia or sick headache. St. Clair took the same kind of amusement in the child that a man might in the tricks of a parrot or a pointer. Topsy, whenever her sins brought her into disgrace in other quarters, always took refuge behind his chair, and St. Clair, in one way or other, would make peace for her. From him she got many a stray picayune, which she laid out in nuts and candies, and distributed with careless generosity to all the children in the family. For Topsy, to do her justice, was good-natured and liberal, and only spiteful in self-defense. She is fairly introduced into our corps de ballet, and will figure, from time to time in her turn, with other performers. End of chapter 20. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 21. Kentuck. Our readers may not be unwilling to glance back, for a brief interval, at Uncle Tom's cabin on the Kentucky farm and see what has been transpiring among those whom he had left behind. It was late in the summer afternoon, and the doors and windows of the large parlor all stood open to invite any stray breeze that might feel in good humor to enter. Mr. Shelby sat in a large hall opening into the room and running through the whole length of the house to a balcony on either end. Leisurely tipped back on one chair, with his heels in another, he was enjoying his after-dinner cigar. Mrs. Shelby sat at the door, busy about some fine sewing. She seemed like one who had something on her mind, which she was seeking an opportunity to introduce.
"Do you know," she said, "that Chloe has had a letter from Tom?"
"Ah, has she? Tom's got some friends there, it seems. How is the old boy?"
"He has been bought by a very fine family, I should think," said Mrs. Shelby. "Is kindly treated, and has not much to do."
"Ah, well, I'm glad of it. Very glad," said Mr. Shelby heartily. "Tom, I suppose, will get reconciled to a Southern residence, hardly want to come up here again."
"On the contrary, he inquires very anxiously," said Mrs. Shelby, "when the money for his redemption is to be raised."
"I'm sure I don't know," said Mr. Shelby. "Once get business running wrong, there does seem to be no end to it. It's like jumping from one bog to another, all through a swamp. Borrow one to pay another, and then borrow of another to pay one, and these confounded notes falling due before a man has time to smoke a cigar and turn around. Dunning letters and dunning messages, all scamper and hurry-scurry."
"It does seem to me, my dear, that something might be done to straighten matters. Suppose we sell off all the horses, and sell one of your farms, and pay up square."
"Oh, ridiculous, Emily. You are the finest woman in Kentucky, but still you haven't sense to know that you don't understand business. Women never do, and never can."
"But at least," said Mrs. Shelby, "could not you give me some little insight into yours? A list of all your debts, at least, and of all that is owed to you, and let me try and see if I can help you to economize."
"Oh, bother. Don't plague me, Emily. I can't tell exactly. I know somewhere about what things are likely to be, but there's no trimming and squaring my affairs, as Chloe trims crust off her pies. You don't know anything about business, I tell you." And Mr. Shelby, not knowing any other way of enforcing his ideas, raised his voice, a mode of arguing very convenient and convincing when a gentleman is discussing matters of business with his wife. Mrs. Shelby ceased talking, with something of a sigh. The fact was that, though her husband had stated she was a woman, she had a clear, energetic, practical mind, and a force of character every way superior to that of her husband, so that it would not have been so very absurd a supposition to have allowed her capable of managing, as Mr. Shelby supposed. Her heart was set on performing her promise to Tom and Aunt Chloe, and she sighed as discouragements thickened around her.
"Don't you think we might in some way contrive to raise that money? Poor Aunt Chloe, her heart is so set on it."
"I'm sorry if it is. I think I was premature in promising. I'm not sure, now, but it's the best way to tell Chloe, and let her make up her mind to it. Tom'll have another wife in a year or two, and she had better take up with somebody else."
"Mr. Shelby, I have taught my people that their marriages are as sacred as ours. I never could think of giving Chloe such advice."
"It's a pity, wife, that you have burdened them with a morality above their condition and prospects. I always thought so."
"It's only morality of the Bible, Mr. Shelby."
Well, well, Emily, I don't pretend to interfere with your religious notions, only they seem extremely unfitted for people in that condition."
"They are, indeed," said Mrs. Shelby, "and that is why from my soul I hate the whole thing.
I tell you, my dear, I cannot absolve myself from the promises I make to these helpless creatures. If I can get the money no other way, I will take music scholars. I could get enough, I know, and earn the money myself." "You wouldn't degrade yourself that way, Emily. I never could consent to it." "Degrade? Would it degrade me as much as to break my faith with the helpless? No, indeed." "Well, you are always heroic and transcendental," said Mr. Shelby, "but I think you had better think before you undertake such a piece of quixotism." Here the conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Aunt Chloe at the end of the veranda.
"If you please, missus," said she.
"Well, Chloe, what is it?" said her mistress, rising and going to the end of the balcony.
"If missus would come and look at this here lot of poetry."
Chloe had a particular fancy for calling poultry poetry, an application of language in which she always persisted, notwithstanding frequent corrections and advisings from the young members of the family.
"Law sakes,"
she would say,
"I can't see one just good as Turry. Poetry's suthin good, anyhow."
And so poetry Chloe continued to call it. Mrs. Shelby smiled as she saw a prostrate lot of chickens and ducks over which Chloe stood, with a very grave face of consideration.
"I'm a-thinking whether missus would be a-having a chicken pie o' these here."
"Really, Aunt Chloe, I don't much care. Serve them any way you like." Chloe stood handling them over abstractedly. It was quite evident that the chickens were not what she was thinking of. At last, with a short laugh with which her tribe often introduce a doubtful proposal, she said,
"Laws, missus, what should Massa and missus be a-troubling theirselves about the money, and not a-using what's right in their hands?"
And Chloe laughed again. "I don't understand you, Chloe," said Mrs. Shelby, nothing doubting, from her knowledge of Chloe's manner, that she had heard every word of the conversation that had passed between her and her husband.
"Why, laws me, missus," said Chloe, laughing again, "other folks hires out their niggers and makes money on them. Don't keep such a tribe eating them out of house and home."
"Well, Chloe, who do you propose that we should hire out?"
"Laws, I ain't proposing nothing. Only Sam said there was one of these there perfectioners, they's call 'em in Louisville, said he wanted a good hand at cake and pastry, and said he'd give 'em $4 a week to one, he did."
"Well, Chloe?"
"Well, laws, I's a-thinking, missus, it's time Sally was put along to be doing something. Sally's been under my care now dis some time, and she does most as well as me, considering, and if missus would only let me go, I would help fetch up the money. I ain't feared to put my cake nor pies nother 'longside no perfectioners."
"Confectioners, Chloe."
"Law sakes, missus, 'tain't no odds. Words is so cur'us, can't never get 'em right."
"But, Chloe, do you want to leave your children?"
"Laws, missus, the boys is big enough to do day's work. They do well enough, and Sally, she'll take the baby. She's such a pert young un, she won't take no looking arter."
"Louisville is a good way off."
"Law sakes, who's afeard? It's down river, some near my old man, perhaps,"
said Chloe, speaking the last in the tone of a question, and looking at Mrs. Shelby. "No, Chloe, it's many 100 miles off," said Mrs. Shelby. Chloe's countenance fell. "Never mind. Your going there shall bring you nearer, Chloe. Yes, you may go, and your wages shall every cent of them be laid aside for your husband's redemption." As when a bright sunbeam turns a dark cloud to silver, so Chloe's dark face brightened immediately. It really shone.
"Laws, if missus isn't too good! I was thinking that are very thing, 'cause I shouldn't need no clothes, nor shoes, nor nothing. I could save every cent. How many weeks is there in a year, missus?"
52, said Mrs. Shelby.
"Laws, now, dear is, and $4 for each on 'em. Why, how much dat ar be?"
$208, said Mrs. Shelby.
"Why," said Chloe, with an accent of surprise and delight, "and how long would it take me to work it out, missus?"
"Some 4 or 5 years, Chloe, but then you needn't do it all. I shall add something to it."
"I wouldn't hear to missus giving lessons nor nothing. Masser's quite right in dat ar. 'Twouldn't do, no ways. I hope none of our family ever be brought to dat ar while I's got hands."
"Don't fear, Chloe. "I'll take care of the honor of the family," said Mrs. Shelby, smiling. "But when do you expect to go?"
"Well, I wa'n't 'specting nothing, only Sam he's gwine to de river with some colts, and he said I could go 'long with him, so I just put my things together. If Missus was willing, I'd go with Sam tomorrow morning, if Missus would write my pass and write me a commendation."
"Well, Chloe, I'll attend to it, if Mr. Shelby has no objections. I must speak to him." Mrs. Shelby went upstairs, and Aunt Chloe, delighted, went out to her cabin to make her preparation.
"Law sakes, Massa George, you didn't know I 'uz gwine to Louisville tomorrow,"
she said to George, as entering her cabin he found her busy in sorting over her baby's clothes.
"I thought I'd just look over Sis's things and get 'em straightened up. But I'm gwine, Massa George, gwine to have $4 a week, and Missus gwine to lay it all up to buy back my old man again."
"Whew!" said George.
"Here's a stroke of business, to be sure. How are you going?" "Tomorrow wid Sam. And now, Massa George, I knows you'll just sit down and write to my old man and tell him all about it, won't you?"
"To be sure," said George. "Uncle Tom will be right glad to hear from us. I'll go right in the house for paper and ink, and then, you know, Aunt Chloe, I can tell about the new colts and all."
"Sartin, Massa George. You go 'long, and I'll get ye up a bit of chicken or some sich. You won't have many more suppers wid your poor old auntie."
End of chapter 21. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 22. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth. Life passes, with us all, a day at a time. So it passed with our friend Tom, till 2 years were gone. Though parted from all his soul held dear, and though often yearning for what lay beyond, still was he never positively and consciously miserable. For so well is the harp of human feeling strung, that nothing but a crash that breaks every string can wholly mar its harmony. And, on looking back to seasons which in review appear to us as those of deprivation and trial, we can remember that each hour, as it glided, brought its diversions and alleviations, so that, though not happy wholly, we were not either wholly miserable. Tom read, in his only literary cabinet, of one who had learned in whatsoever state he was, therewith to be content. It seemed to him good and reasonable doctrine, and accorded well with the settled and thoughtful habit which he had acquired from the reading of that same book. His letter homeward, as we related in the last chapter, was in due time answered by Master George in a good, round, schoolboy hand, that Tom said might be read most across the room. It contained various refreshing items of home intelligence, with which our reader is fully acquainted, stated how Aunt Chloe had been hired out to a confectioner in Louisville, where her skill in the pastry line was gaining wonderful sums of money, all of which, Tom was informed, was to be laid up to go to make up the sum of his redemption money. Mose and Pete were thriving, and the baby was trotting all about the house, under the care of Sally and the family generally. Tom's cabin was shut up for the present, but George expatiated brilliantly on ornaments and additions to be made to it when Tom came back. The rest of this letter gave a list of George's school studies, each one headed by a flourishing capital, and also told the names of 4 new colts that appeared on the premises since Tom left, and stated in the same connection that father and mother were well. The style of the letter was decidedly concise and terse, but Tom thought it the most wonderful specimen of composition that had appeared in modern times. He was never tired of looking at it, and even held a council with Eva on the expediency of getting it framed to hang up in his room. Nothing but the difficulty of arranging it so that both sides of the page would show at once stood in the way of this undertaking. The friendship between Tom and Eva had grown with the child's growth. It would be hard to say what place she held in the soft, impressible heart of her faithful attendant. He loved her as something frail and earthly, yet almost worshipped her as something heavenly and divine. He gazed on her as the Italian sailor gazes on his image of the child Jesus, with a mixture of reverence and tenderness; and to humor her graceful fancies, and meet those thousand simple wants which invest childhood like a many-colored rainbow, was Tom's chief delight. In the market, at morning, his eyes were always on the flower stalls for rare bouquets for her, and the choicest peach or orange was slipped into his pocket to give to her when he came back. And the sight that pleased him most was her sunny head looking out the gate for his distant approach, and her childish questions,
"Well, Uncle Tom, what have you got for me today?"
Nor was Eva less zealous in kind offices in return. Though a child, she was a beautiful reader. A fine musical ear, a quick poetic fancy, and an instinctive sympathy with what's grand and noble, made her such a reader of the Bible as Tom had never before heard. At first she read to please her humble friend, but soon her own earnest nature threw out its tendrils and wound itself around the majestic book, and Eva loved it, because it woke in her strange yearnings and strong, dim emotions, such as impassioned, imaginative children love to feel. The parts that pleased her most were the revelations and the prophecies, parts whose dim and wondrous imagery and fervent language impressed her the more that she questioned vainly of their meaning. And she and her simple friend, the old child and the young one, felt just alike about it. All that they knew was that they spoke of a glory to be revealed, a wondrous something yet to come, wherein their soul rejoiced, yet knew not why; and though it be not so in the physical, yet in moral science that which cannot be understood is not always profitless. For the soul awakes, a trembling stranger, between two dim eternities, the eternal past, the eternal future. The light shines only on a small space around her, therefore she needs must yearn toward the unknown, and the voices and shadowy movings which come to her from out the cloudy pillar of inspiration have each one echoes and answers in her own expecting nature. Its mystic imagery are so many talismans and gems inscribed with unknown hieroglyphics. She folds them in her bosom, and expects to read them when she passes beyond the veil. At this time in our story, the whole St. Clair establishment is, for the time being, removed to their villa on Lake Pontchartrain. The heats of summer have driven all who are able to leave the sultry and unhealthy city to seek the shores of the lake and its cool sea breezes. St. Clair's villa was an East Indian cottage, surrounded by light verandas of bamboo work, and opening on all sides into gardens and pleasure grounds. The common sitting room opened onto a large garden, fragrant with every picturesque plant and flower of the tropics, where winding paths ran down to the very shores of the lake, whose silvery sheet of water lay there, rising and falling in the sunbeams, a picture never for an hour the same, yet every hour more beautiful. It is now one of those intensely golden sunsets which kindles the whole horizon into one blaze of glory, and makes the water another sky. The lake lay in rosy or golden streaks, save where white-winged vessels glided hither and thither, like so many spirits, and little golden stars twinkled through the glow, and looked down at themselves as they trembled in the water. Tom and Eva were seated on a little mossy seat in an arbor at the foot of the garden. It was Sunday evening, and Eva's Bible lay open on her knee. She read,
"And I saw a sea of glass mingled with fire." "Tom," said Eva, suddenly stopping and pointing to the lake, "there 'tis."
"What, Miss Eva?"
"Don't you see? There," said the child, pointing to the glassy water, which, as it rose and fell, reflected the golden glow of the sky. "There is a sea of glass mingled with fire."
"True enough, Miss Eva," said Tom, and Tom sang, "Oh, had I the wings of the morning, I'd fly away to Canaan's shore, bright angels should convey me home to the New Jerusalem."
"Where do you suppose New Jerusalem is, Uncle Tom?" said Eva.
"Oh, up in the clouds, Miss Eva."
"Then I think I see it," said Eva. "Look in those clouds. They look like great gates of pearl, and you can see beyond them, far, far off, it's all gold. Tom, sing about spirits bright." Tom sung the words of a well-known Methodist hymn: "I see a band of spirits bright, that taste the glories there.
They all are robed in spotless white, and conquering palms they bear."
"Uncle Tom, I've seen them," said Eva.
Tom had no doubt of it at all. It did not surprise him in the least. If Eva had told him she had been to heaven, he would have thought it entirely probable.
"They come to me sometimes in my sleep, those spirits."
And Eva's eyes grew dreamy, and she hummed in a low voice,
"They are all robed in spotless white, and conquering palms they bear." "Uncle Tom," said Eva, "I'm going there."
"Where, Miss Eva?" The child rose and pointed her little hand to the sky. The glow of evening lit her golden hair and flushed cheek with a kind of unearthly radiance, and her eyes were bent earnestly on the skies.
"I'm going there," she said, "to the spirits bright, Tom. I'm going before long."
The faithful old heart felt a sudden thrust, and Tom thought how often he had noticed, within 6 months, that Eva's little hands had grown thinner, and her skin more transparent, and her breath shorter, and how, when she ran or played in the garden, as she once could for hours, she became soon so tired and languid. He had heard Miss Ophelia speak often of a cough that all her medicaments could not cure, and even now that fervent cheek and little hand were burning with hectic fever, and yet the thought that Eva's words suggested had never come to him till now. Has there ever been a child like Eva? Yes, there have been, but their names are always on gravestones, and their sweet smiles, their heavenly eyes, their singular words and ways, are among the buried treasures of yearning hearts. In how many families do you hear the legend that all the goodness and graces of the living are nothing to the peculiar charms of one who is not? It is as if heaven had an especial band of angels, whose office it was to sojourn for a season here, and endear to them the wayward human heart, that they might bear it upward with them in their homeward flight. When you see that deep spiritual light in the eye, when the little soul reveals itself in words sweeter and wiser than the ordinary words of children, hope not to retain that child, for the seal of heaven is on it, and the light of immortality looks out from its eyes. Even so, beloved Eva, fair star of thy dwelling, thou art passing away, but they that love thee dearest know it not. The colloquy between Tom and Eva was interrupted by a hasty call from Miss Ophelia.
"Eva? Eva? Why, child, the dew is falling. You mustn't be out there."
Eva and Tom hastened in. Miss Ophelia was old, and skilled in the tactics of nursing. She was from New England, and knew well the first guileless footsteps of that soft, insidious disease which sweeps away so many of the fairest and loveliest, and, before one fibre of life seems broken, seals them irrevocably for death. She had noted the slight dry cough, the daily brightening cheek, nor could the luster of the eye and the airy buoyancy born of fever deceive her. She tried to communicate her fears to St. Clair, but he threw back her suggestions with a restless petulance unlike his usual careless good humor. "Don't be croaking, cousin, I hate it," he would say. "Don't you see that the child is only growing? Children always lose strength when they grow fast."
"But she has that cough."
"Oh, nonsense of that cough. It is not anything. She has taken a little cold, perhaps."
"Well, that was just the way Eliza Jane was taken, and Ellen, and Maria Sanders."
"Oh, stop these hobgoblin nurse legends. You old hands got so wise that a child cannot cough or sneeze but you see desperation and ruin at hand. Only take care of the child, keep her from the night air, and don't let her play too hard, and she'll do well enough." So St. Clair said, but he grew nervous and restless. He watched Eva feverishly day by day, as might be told by the frequency with which he repeated over that the child was quite well, that there wasn't anything in that cough, it was only some little stomach affection, such as children often had. But he kept by her more than before, took her oftener to ride with him, brought home every few days some receipt or strengthening mixture. Not, he said, that the child needed it, but then it would not do her any harm. If it must be told, the thing that struck a deeper pang to his heart than anything else was the daily increasing maturity of the child's mind and feelings. While still retaining all a child's fanciful graces, yet she often dropped, unconsciously, words of such a reach of thought and strange unworldly wisdom that they seemed to be an inspiration. At such times St. Clair would feel a sudden thrill and clasp her in his arms, as if that fond clasp could save her, and his heart rose up with wild determination to keep her, never to let her go. The child's whole heart and soul seemed absorbed in works of love and kindness. Impulsively generous she had always been, but there was a touching and womanly thoughtfulness about her now that everyone noticed. She still loved to play with Topsy and the various colored children, but she now seemed rather a spectator than an actor of their plays, and she would sit for half an hour at a time laughing at the odd tricks of Topsy, and then a shadow would seem to pass across her face, her eyes grew misty, and her thoughts were afar.
"Mamma," she said suddenly to her mother one day, "why don't we teach our servants to read?"
"What a question, child! People never do."
"Why don't they?" said Eva.
"Because it is no use for them to read. It don't help them to work any better, and they are not made for anything else."
"But they ought to read the Bible, Mamma, to learn God's will."
"Oh, they can get that read to them all they need."
"It seems to me, Mamma, the Bible is for everyone to read themselves. They need it a great many times when there is nobody to read it."
"Eva, you are an odd child," said her mother.
"Miss Ophelia has taught Topsy to read," continued Eva.
"Yes, and you see how much good it does. Topsy is the worst creature I ever saw."
"Here's poor Mammy," said Eva. "She does love the Bible so much, and wishes so she could read. And what will she do when I can't read to her?"
Marie was busy turning over the contents of a drawer as she answered,
"Well, of course, by and by, Eva, you will have other things to think of besides reading the Bible round to servants. Not but that is very proper. I've done it myself, when I had health. But when you come to be dressing and going into company, you won't have time. See here," she added, "these jewels I'm going to give you when you come out. I wore them to my first ball. I can tell you, Eva, I made a sensation."
Eva took the jewel case and lifted from it a diamond necklace. Her large, thoughtful eyes rested on them, but it was plain her thoughts were elsewhere.
"How sober you look, child," said Marie.
"Are these worth a great deal of money, Mamma?"
"To be sure they are. Father sent to France for them. They are worth a small fortune."
"I wish I had them," said Eva, "to do what I pleased with."
"What would you do with them?"
"I'd sell them, and buy a place in the Free States, and take all our people there, and hire teachers to teach them to read and write."
Eva was cut short by her mother's laughing.
"Set up a boarding school! Wouldn't you teach them to play on the piano and paint on velvet?"
"I'd teach them to read their own Bible, and write their own letters, and read letters that are written to them," said Eva steadily. "I know, Mamma, it does come very hard on them that they can't do these things. Tom feels it. Mammy does. A great many of them do. I think it's wrong."
"Come, come, Eva, you are only a child. You don't know anything about these things," said Marie. "Besides, your talking makes my head ache."
Marie always had a headache on hand for any conversation that did not exactly suit her. Eva stole away, but after that she assiduously gave Mammy reading lessons. End of chapter 22. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 23. Henrik. About this time, St. Clair's brother Alfred, with his eldest son, a boy of 12, spent a day or two with the family at the lake. No sight could be more singular and beautiful than that of these twin brothers. Nature, instead of instituting resemblances between them, had made them opposites on every point. Yet a mysterious tie seemed to unite them in a closer friendship than ordinary. They used to saunter, arm in arm, up and down the alleys and walks of the garden. Augustine, with his blue eyes and golden hair, his ethereally flexible form and vivacious features, and Alfred, dark-eyed, with haughty Roman profile, firmly knit limbs, and decided bearing. They were always abusing each other's opinions and practices, and yet never a whit the less absorbed in each other's society. In fact, the very contrariety seemed to unite them, like the attraction between opposite poles of the magnet. Henrik, the eldest son of Alfred, was a noble, dark-eyed, princely boy, full of vivacity and spirit, and from the first moment of introduction seemed to be perfectly fascinated by the spirituelle graces of his cousin Evangeline. Eva had a little pet pony of a snowy whiteness. It was easy as a cradle and as gentle as its little mistress, and this pony was now brought up to the back veranda by Tom, while a little mulatto boy of about 13 led along a small black Arabian, which had just been imported at a great expense for Henrik. Henrik had a boy's pride in his new possession, and as he advanced and took the reins out of the hands of his little groom, he looked carefully over him, and his brow darkened.
"What's this, Dodo, you little lazy dog? You haven't rubbed my horse down this morning." "Yes, massa," said Dodo submissively. "He got that dust on his own self." "You rascal, shut your mouth," said Henrik, violently raising his riding-whip. "How dare you speak?" The boy was a handsome, bright-eyed mulatto of just Henrik's size, and his curling hair hung round a high, bold forehead. He had white blood in his veins, as could be seen by the quick flush in his cheek and the sparkle of his eye, as he eagerly tried to speak. "Massa Henrik," he began. Henrik struck him across the face with his riding-whip, and, seizing one of his arms, forced him onto his knees and beat him till he was out of breath. "There, you impudent dog! Now will you learn not to answer back when I speak to you? Take the horse back, and clean him properly. I'll teach you your place."
"Young massa," said Tom, "I specs what he was gwine to say was, that the horse would roll when he was bringing him up from the stable. He's so full of spirits, that's the way he got that dirt on him. I looked to his cleaning."
"You hold your tongue till you're asked to speak," said Henrik, turning on his heel, and walking up the steps to speak to Eva, who stood in her riding dress. "Dear cousin, I'm sorry this stupid fellow has kept you waiting," he said. "Let's sit down here on this seat till they come. What's the matter, cousin? You look sober." "How could you be so cruel and wicked to poor Dodo?" asked Eva. "Cruel? Wicked?" said the boy with unaffected surprise. "What do you mean, dear Eva?" "I don't want you to call me dear Eva when you do so," said Eva. "Dear cousin, you don't know Dodo. It's the only way to manage him, he's so full of lies and excuses. The only way is to put him down at once, not let him open his mouth. That's the way papa manages." "But Uncle Tom said it was an accident, and he never tells what isn't true." "He's an uncommon old nigger, then," said Henrik. "Dodo will lie as fast as he can speak." "You frighten him into deceiving, if you treat him so." "Why, Eva, you've really taken such a fancy to Dodo that I shall be jealous." "But you beat him, and he didn't deserve it."
"Oh, well, it may go for some time when he does, and don't get it. A few cuts never come amiss with Dodo. He's a regular spirit, I can tell you. But I won't beat him again before you, if it troubles you." Eva was not satisfied, but found it in vain to try to make her handsome cousin understand her feelings. Dodo soon appeared with the horses. "Well, Dodo, you've done pretty well this time," said his young master with a more gracious air. "Come, now, and hold Miss Eva's horse while I put her on the saddle." Dodo came and stood by Eva's pony. His face was troubled. His eyes looked as if he had been crying. Henrik, who valued himself on his gentlemanly adroitness in all matters of gallantry, soon had his fair cousin in the saddle, and, gathering the reins, placed them in her hands. But Eva bent to the other side of the horse, where Dodo was standing, and said as he relinquished the reins, "That's a good boy, Dodo. Thank you." Dodo looked up in amazement into the sweet young face. The blood rushed to his cheeks, and the tears to his eyes. "Here, Dodo," said his master imperiously. Dodo sprang and held the horse while his master mounted. "There's a picayune for you to buy candy with, Dodo," said Henrik. "Go get some." And Henrik cantered down the walk after Eva. Dodo stood looking after the two children. One had given him money, and one had given him what he wanted far more, a kind word, kindly spoken. Dodo had been only a few months away from his mother. His master had bought him at a slave warehouse, for his handsome face, to be a match to the handsome pony. and he was now getting his breaking in at the hands of his young master. The scene of the beating had been witnessed by the two brothers St. Clair from another part of the garden. Augustine's cheek flushed, but he only observed, with his usual sarcastic carelessness, "I suppose that's what we may call republican education, Alfred?" "Henrik is a devil of a fellow when his blood's up," said Alfred, carelessly. "I suppose you consider this an instructive practice for him," said Augustine, dryly. "I couldn't help it if I didn't. Henrik is a regular little tempest. His mother and I have given him up long ago. But then, that Dodo is a perfect sprite. No amount of whipping can hurt him. And this by way of teaching Henrik the first verse of a Republican's catechism, 'All men are born free and equal.'" "Pooh," said Alfred. "One of Tom Jefferson's pieces of French sentiment and humbug. It's perfectly ridiculous to have that going the rounds among us to this day." "I think it is," said St. Clair, significantly. "Because," said Alfred, "we can see plainly enough that all men are not born free, nor born equal. They are born anything else. For my part, I think half this Republican talk sheer humbug. It is the educated, the intelligent, the wealthy, the refined who ought to have equal rights, and not the canaille." "If you can keep the canaille of that opinion," said St. Augustine, "they took their turn once in France." "Well, of course they must be kept down, consistently, steadily, as I should," said Alfred, setting his foot hard down as if he were standing on someone. "It makes a terrible slip when they get up," said Augustine. "In St. Domingo, for instance." "Pooh," said Alfred, "we'll take care of that in this country. We must set our face against all this educating, elevating talk that is getting about now. The lower class must not be educated." "That is past praying for," said Augustine. "Educated they will be, and we have only to say how. Our system is educating them in barbarism and brutality. We are breaking all humanizing ties, and making them brute beasts, and if they get the upper hand, such we shall find them." "They shall never get the upper hand," said Alfred. "That's right," said St. Clair. "Put on the steam, fasten down the escape valve, and sit on it, and see where you'll land." "Well," said Alfred, "we will see. I'm not afraid to sit on the escape valve as long as the boilers are strong and the machinery works well. The nobles in Louis XVI's time thought just so, and Austria and Pius IX think so now. And some pleasant morning you may all be caught up to meet each other in the air when the boilers burst." "Dies declaravit," said Alfred, laughing. "I tell you," said Augustine, "if there is anything that is revealed with the strength of a divine law in our times, it is that the masses are to rise, and the underclass become the upper one." "That's one of your red Republican humbugs, Augustine. Why didn't you ever take to the stump? You'd make a famous stump orator." "Well, I hope I shall be dead before this millennium of your greasy masses comes on." "Greasy or not greasy, they will govern you, when their time comes," said Augustine, "and they will be just such rulers as you make them. The French noblesse chose to have the people sans culotte, and they had sans culotte governors to their heart's content. The people of Haiti—" "Oh, come, Augustine, as if we hadn't had enough of that abominable, contemptible Haiti." Note: In August 1791, as a consequence of the French Revolution, the black slaves and the mulattoes on Haiti rose in revolt against the whites, and in the period of turmoil that followed enormous cruelties were practiced by both sides. The Emperor Dessalines, come to power in 1804, massacred all the whites on the island. Haitian bloodshed became an argument to show the barbarous nature of the Negro, a doctrine Wendell Phillips sought to combat in his celebrated lecture on Toussaint L'Ouverture. The Haitians were not Anglo-Saxons. If they had been, there would have been another story. The Anglo-Saxon is the dominant race of the world, and is to be so. "Well, there is a pretty fair infusion of Anglo-Saxon blood among our slaves now," said Augustine. "There are plenty among them who have only enough of the African to give a sort of tropical warmth and fervor to our calculating firmness and foresight. If ever the San Domingo hour comes, Anglo-Saxon blood will lead on the day. Sons of white fathers, with all our haughty feelings burning in their veins, will not always be bought and sold and traded. They will rise, and raise with them their mother's race." "Stuff! Nonsense!" "Well," said Augustine, "there goes an old saying to this effect: 'As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be. They ate, they drank, they planted, they builded, and knew not till the flood came and took them. "On the whole, Augustine, I think your talents might do for a circuit rider," said Alfred, laughing. "Never you fear for us. Possession is our 9 points. We've got the power. This subject race," said he, stamping firmly, "is down and shall stay down. We have energy enough to manage our own powder." "Sons trained like your Henrik will be grand guardians of your powder magazines," said Augustine. "So cool and self-possessed. The proverb says, 'They that cannot govern themselves cannot govern others.'" "There is a trouble there," said Alfred, thoughtfully. "There's no doubt that our system is a difficult one to train children under. It gives too free scope to the passions altogether, which in our climate are hot enough. I find trouble with Henrik. The boy is generous and warm-hearted, but a perfect firecracker when excited. I believe I shall send him North for his education, where obedience is more fashionable, and where he will associate more with equals and less with dependents." "Since training children is the staple work of the human race," said Augustine, "I should think it something of a consideration that our system does not work well there." "It does not for some things," said Alfred. "For others, again, it does. It makes boys manly and courageous, and the very vices of an abject race tend to strengthen in them the opposite virtues. I think Henrik, now, has a keener sense of the beauty of truth, from seeing lying and deception the universal badge of slavery." "A Christian-like view of the subject, certainly," said Augustine. "It's true, Christian-like or not, and is about as Christian-like as most other things in the world," said Alfred. "That may be," said St. Clair. "Well, there's no use in talking, Augustine. I believe we've been round and round this old track 500 times, more or less. What do you say to a game of backgammon?" The two brothers ran up the veranda steps, and were soon seated at a light bamboo stand with a backgammon board between them. As they were setting their men, Alfred said, "I tell you, Augustine, if I thought as you do, I should do something." "I dare say you would. You are one of the doing sort. But what?" "Why, elevate your servants, for a specimen," said Alfred, with a half-scornful smile. "You might as well set Mount Etna on them flat, and tell them to stand up under it, as tell me to elevate my servants under all the superincumbent mass of society upon them. One man can do nothing against the whole action of a community. Education, to do anything, must be a state education, or there must be enough agreed in it to make a current." "You take the first throw," said Alfred, and the brothers were soon lost in the game, and heard no more till the scraping of horses' feet was heard under the veranda. "There come the children," said Augustine, rising. "Look here, Alf, did you ever see anything so beautiful?" And in truth it was a beautiful sight. Henrik, with his bold brow, and dark glossy curls, and glowing cheek, was laughing gaily as he bent towards his fair cousin as they came on. She was dressed in a blue riding dress, with a cap of the same color. Exercise had given a brilliant hue to her cheeks, and heightened the effect of her singularly transparent skin and golden hair. "Good heavens, what perfectly dazzling beauty!" said Alfred. "I tell you, August, won't she make some heart's ache one of these days?" "She will, too truly. God knows I'm afraid so," said St. Clair in a tone of sudden bitterness, as he hurried down to take her off her horse. "Eva, darling, you're not much tired?" he said as he clasped her in his arms. "No, papa," said the child, but her short, hard breathing alarmed her father. "How could you ride so fast, dear? You know it's bad for you." "I felt so well, papa. I liked it so much I forgot." St. Clair carried her in his arms into the parlor and laid her on the sofa. "Henrik, you must be careful of Eva," said he. "You mustn't ride fast with her." "I'll take her under my care," said Henrik, seating himself by the sofa and taking Eva's hand. Eva soon found herself much better. Her father and uncle resumed their game, and the children were left together. "Do you know, Eva, I'm sorry papa is only going to stay 2 days here, and then I shan't see you again for ever so long. If I stay with you, I try to be good, and not be cross to Dodo and so on. I don't mean to treat Dodo ill, but you know I've got such a quick temper. I'm not really bad to him, though. I give him a picayune now and then, and you see he dresses well. I think, on the whole, Dodo's pretty well off." "Would you think you were well off, if there were not one creature in the world near you to love you?" "I? Well, of course not." "And you have taken Dodo away from all the friends he ever had, and now he has not a creature to love him. Nobody can be good that way." "Well, I can't help it, as I know of. I can't get his mother, and I can't love him myself, nor anybody else as I know of."
"Why can't you?" said Eva.
"Love, Dodo?
"Why, Eva, you wouldn't have me. I may like him well enough, but you don't love your servants."
"I do, indeed."
"How odd! Don't the Bible say we must love everybody?"
"Oh, the Bible."
"To be sure, it says a great many such things, but then nobody ever thinks of doing them, you know, Eva. Nobody does."
Eva did not speak. Her eyes were fixed and thoughtful for a few moments.
"At any rate," she said, "dear cousin, do love poor Dodo, and be kind to him, for my sake."
"I could love anything for your sake, dear cousin, for I really think you are the loveliest creature that I ever saw." And Henrik spoke with an earnestness that flushed his handsome face. Eva received it with perfect simplicity, without even a change of feature, merely saying,
"I'm glad you feel so, dear Henrik. I hope you will remember."
The dinner bell put an end to the interview. End of chapter 23. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 24. Foreshadowings. 2 days after this, Alfred St. Clair and Augustine parted, and Eva, who had been stimulated by the society of her young cousin to exertions beyond her strength, began to fail rapidly. St. Clair was at last willing to call in medical advice, a thing from which he had always shrunk, because it was the admission of an unwelcome truth. But, for a day or two, Eva was so unwell as to be confined to the house, and the doctor was called. Marie St. Clair had taken no notice of the child's gradually decaying health and strength, because she was completely absorbed in studying out 2 or 3 new forms of disease to which she believed she herself was a victim. It was the first principle of Marie's belief that nobody ever was or could be so great a sufferer as herself, and therefore she always repelled quite indignantly any suggestion that anyone around her could be sick. She was always sure, in such a case, that it was nothing but laziness, or want of energy, and that if they had had the suffering she had, they would soon know the difference. Miss Ophelia had several times tried to awaken her maternal fears about Eva, but to no avail.
"I don't see as anything ails the child," she would say. "She runs about and plays."
"But she has a cough."
"Cough? You don't need to tell me about a cough. I've always been subject to a cough all my days. When I was Eva's age, they thought I was in a consumption. Night after night, Mammy used to sit up with me. Oh, Eva's cough is not anything." "But she gets weak, and is short-breathed."
"Law, I've had that years and years. It's only a nervous affection."
"But she sweats so, nights."
"Well, I have these 10 years. Very often, night after night, my clothes will be wringing wet.
There won't be a dry thread in my night clothes, and the sheets will be so that Mammy has to hang them up to dry. Eva doesn't sweat anything like that."
Miss Ophelia shut her mouth for a season, but now that Eva was fairly and visibly prostrated and a doctor called, Marie, all on a sudden, took a new turn.
"She knew it," she said. "She always felt it, that she was destined to be the most miserable of mothers. Here she was, with her wretched health, and her only darling child going down to the grave before her eyes."
And Marie routed up Mammy's nights, and rumpused and scolded with more energy than ever, all day, on the strength of this new misery.
"My dear Marie, don't talk so," said St. Clair. "You ought not to give up the case so, at once."
"You have not a mother's feelings, St. Clair. You never could understand me. You don't know."
"But don't talk so, as if it were a gone case."
"I can't take it as indifferently as you can, St. Clair. If you don't feel when your only child is in this alarming state, I do. It's a blow too much for me, with all I was bearing before."
"It's true," said St. Clair, "that Eva is very delicate. That I always knew. And that she has grown so rapidly as to exhaust her strength, and that her situation is critical. But just now she is only prostrated by the heat of the weather, and by the excitement of her cousin's visit, and the exertions she made. The physician says there is room for hope."
Well, of course, if you can look on the bright side, pray do. It's a mercy if people haven't sensitive feelings in this world. I am sure I wish I didn't feel as I do. It only makes me completely wretched. I wish I could be as easy as the rest of you."
And the rest of them had good reason to breathe the same prayer, for Marie paraded her new misery as the reason and apology for all sorts of inflictions on every one about her. Every word that was spoken by anybody, everything that was done or was not done everywhere, was only a new proof that she was surrounded by hard-hearted, insensible beings who were unmindful of her peculiar sorrows. Poor Eva heard some of these speeches, and nearly cried her little eyes out in pity for her mamma, and in sorrow that she should make her so much distress. In a week or two there was a great improvement of symptoms, one of those deceitful lulls by which her inexorable disease so often beguiles the anxious heart, even on the verge of the grave. Eva's step was again in the garden, in the balconies. She played and laughed again, and her father, in a transport, declared that they should soon have her as hearty as anybody. Miss Ophelia and the physician alone felt no encouragement from this elusive truce. There was one other heart, too, that felt the same certainty, and that was the little heart of Eva. What is it that sometimes speaks in the soul so calmly, so clearly, that its earthly time is short? Is it the secret instinct of decaying nature, or the soul's impulsive throb as immortality draws on? Be it what it may, it rested in the heart of Eva, a calm, sweet, prophetic certainty that heaven was near, calm as the light of sunset, sweet as the bright stillness of autumn. There her little heart reposed, only troubled by sorrow for those who loved her so dearly. For the child, though nursed so tenderly, and though life was unfolding before her with every brightness that love and wealth could give, had no regret for herself in dying. In that book which she and her simple old friend had read so much together, she had seen and taken to her young heart the image of one who loved the little child, and as she gazed and mused, he had ceased to be an image and a picture of the distant past, and come to be a living, all-surrounding reality. His love enfolded her childish heart with more than mortal tenderness, and it was to him, she said, she was going, and to his home. But her heart yearned with sad tenderness for all that she was to leave behind. Her father most, for Eva, though she never distinctly thought so, had an instinctive perception that she was more in his heart than any other. She loved her mother because she was so loving a creature, and all the selfishness that she had seen in her only saddened and perplexed her, for she had a child's implicit trust that her mother could not do wrong. There was something about her that Eva never could make out, and she always smoothed it over with thinking that, after all, it was Mamma, and she loved her very dearly indeed. She felt, too, for those fond, faithful servants to whom she was as daylight and sunshine. Children do not usually generalize, but Eva was an uncommonly mature child, and the things that she had witnessed of the evils of the system under which they were living had fallen, one by one, into the depths of her thoughtful, pondering heart. She had vague longings to do something for them, to bless and save not only them, but all in their condition, longings that contrasted sadly with the feebleness of her little frame. "Uncle Tom," she said one day when she was reading to her friend, "I can understand why Jesus wanted to die for us." "Why, Miss Eva?"
"Because I felt so, too."
"What is it, Miss Eva? I don't understand."
"I can't tell you, but when I saw those poor creatures on the boat, you know, when you came up, and some had lost their mothers, and some their husbands, and some mothers cried for their little children, and when I heard about your poor Prue, oh, wasn't that dreadful? And a great many other times I felt that I would be glad to die, if my dying could stop all this misery. I would die for them, Tom, if I could," said the child earnestly, laying her little thin hand on his. Tom looked at the child with awe, and when she, hearing her father's voice, glided away, he wiped his eyes many times as he looked after her. "It's just no use trying to keep Miss Eva here," he said to Mammy, whom he met a moment after. "She's got the Lord's mark in her forehead." "Ah, yes, yes," said Mammy, raising her hands.
I've allers said so. She wasn't never like a child that's to live. There was allers something deep in her eyes. I've told missus so many the time. It's a comin' true. We all sees it. Dear little blessed lamb.
Eva came tripping up the veranda steps to her father. It was late in the afternoon, and the rays of the sun formed a kind of glory behind her as she came forward in her white dress, with her golden hair and glowing cheeks, her eyes unnaturally bright with the slow fever that burned in her veins. St. Clair had called her to show a statuette that he had been buying for her. But her appearance, as she came on, impressed him suddenly and painfully. There is a kind of beauty so intense, yet so fragile, that we cannot bear to look at it. Her father folded her suddenly in his arms, and almost forgot what he was going to tell her. "Eva, dear, you are better nowadays, are you not?"
"Papa," said Eva, with sudden firmness, "I've had things I wanted to say to you a great while. I want to say them now, before I get weaker."
St. Clair trembled as Eva seated herself in his lap. She laid her head on his bosom and said,
"It's all no use, Papa, to keep it to myself any longer. The time is coming that I am going to leave you. I am going, and never to come back."
And Eva sobbed. "Oh, now, my dear little Eva," said St. Clair, trembling as he spoke, but speaking cheerfully, "you've got nervous and low-spirited. You mustn't indulge such gloomy thoughts. See here, I've bought a statuette for you."
"No, Papa," said Eva, putting it gently away. "Don't deceive yourself. I am not any better. I know it perfectly well. And I am going, before long. I am not nervous. I am not low-spirited. If it were not for you, Papa, and my friends, I should be perfectly happy. I want to go. I long to go."
"Why, dear child, what has made your poor little heart so sad?
You have had everything to make you happy that could be given to you. I had rather be in heaven, though only for my friends' sake I would be willing to live. There are a great many things here that make me sad, that seem dreadful to me. I had rather be there, but I don't want to leave you. It almost breaks my heart."
"What makes you sad and seems dreadful, Eva?"
"Oh, things that are done, and done all the time. I feel sad for our poor people. They love me dearly, and they are all good and kind to me. I wish, Papa, they were all free."
"Why, Eva, child, don't you think they are well enough off now?"
"Oh, but Papa, if anything should happen to you, what would become of them? There are very few men like you, Papa. Uncle Alfred isn't like you, and Mamma isn't. And then think of poor old Prue's owners. What horrid things people do, and can do."
And Eva shuddered. "My dear child, you are too sensitive. I'm sorry I ever let you hear such stories."
"Oh, that's what troubles me, Papa. You want me to live so happy and never to have any pain, never suffer anything, not even hear a sad story, when other poor creatures have nothing but pain and sorrow in their lives. And it seems selfish. I ought to know such things. I ought to feel about them. Such things always sunk into my heart. They went down deep. I've thought and thought about them, Papa. Isn't there any way to have all slaves made free?"
"That's a difficult question, dearest. There's no doubt that this way is a very bad one. A great many people think so. I do myself. I heartily wish that there were not a slave in the land. But then I don't know what is to be done about it."
"Papa, you are such a good man, and so noble and kind, and you always have a way of saying things that is so pleasant. Couldn't you go all around and try to persuade people to do right about this? When I am dead, Papa, then you will think of me, and do it for my sake. I would do it if I could."
"When you are dead, Eva," said St. Clair passionately. "Oh, child, don't talk to me so. You are all I have on earth."
"Poor old Prue's child was all that she had, and yet she had to hear it crying, and she couldn't help it. Papa, these poor creatures love their children as much as you do me. Oh, Do something for them. There's poor Mammy loves her children. I've seen her cry when she talked about them. And Tom loves his children, and it's dreadful, papa, that such things are happening all the time."
"There, there, darling," said St. Clair soothingly. "Only don't distress yourself. Don't talk of dying, and I will do anything you wish."
"And promise me, dear father, that Tom shall have his freedom as soon as—"
She stopped, and said in a hesitating tone,
"I am gone."
"Yes, dear, I will do anything in the world, anything you ask me to."
"Dear papa," said the child, laying her burning cheek against his, "how I wish we could go together."
"Where, dearest?" said St. Clair.
"To our Saviour's home. It's so sweet and peaceful there. It is all so loving there."
The child spoke unconsciously, as of a place where she had often been.
"Don't you want to go, papa?" she said.
St. Clair drew her closer to him, but was silent.
"You will come to me,"
said the child, speaking in a voice of calm certainty, which she often used unconsciously. "I shall come after you. I shall not forget you." The shadows of the solemn evening closed round them deeper and deeper as St. Clair sat silently holding the little frail form to his bosom. He saw no more the deep eyes, but the voice came over him as a spirit voice, and, as in a sort of judgment vision, his whole past life rose in a moment before his eyes: his mother's prayers and hymns, his own early yearnings and aspirings for good, and, between them and this hour, years of worldliness and skepticism and what man calls respectable living. We can think much, very much, in a moment. St. Clair saw and felt many things, but spoke nothing, and, as it grew darker, he took his child to her bedroom, and, when she was prepared for rest, he sent away the attendants, and rocked her in his arms, and sung to her till she was asleep. End of chapter 24. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Chapter 25. The Little Evangelist. It was Sunday afternoon. St. Clair was stretched on a bamboo lounge in the veranda, solacing himself with a cigar. Marie lay reclined on a sofa opposite the window opening on the veranda, closely secluded, under an awning of transparent gauze, from the outrages of the mosquitoes, and languidly holding in her hand an elegantly bound prayer-book. She was holding it because it was Sunday, and she imagined she had been reading it, though in fact she had been only taking a succession of short naps with it open in her hand. Miss Ophelia, who, after some rummaging, had hunted up a small Methodist meeting within riding distance, had gone out, with Tom as driver, to attend it, and Eva had accompanied them.
"I say, Augustine," said Marie, after dozing a while, "I must send to the city after my old Dr. Posey. I'm sure I've got the complaint of the heart."
"Well, why need you send for him? This doctor that attends Eva seems skillful."
"I would not trust him in a critical case," said Marie, "and I think I may say mine is becoming so. I've been thinking of it these 2 or 3 nights past. I have such distressing pains, and such strange feelings."
"Oh, Marie, you are blue. I don't believe it's heart complaint."
"I dare say you don't," said Marie. "I was prepared to expect that. You can be alarmed enough if Eva coughs, or has the least thing the matter with her, but you never think of me."
"If it's particularly agreeable to you to have heart disease, why, I'll try and maintain you have it," said St. Clair. "I didn't know it was."
"Well, I only hope you won't be sorry for this when it's too late," said Marie. "But, believe it or not, my distress about Eva and the exertions I have made with that dear child have developed what I have long suspected."
What the exertions were which Marie referred to, it would have been difficult to state. St. Clair quietly made this commentary to himself, and went on smoking, like a hard-hearted wretch of a man as he was, till a carriage drove up before the veranda, and Eva and Miss Ophelia alighted. Miss Ophelia marched straight to her own chamber to put away her bonnet and shawl, as was always her manner, before she spoke a word on any subject, while Eva came, at St. Clair's call, and was sitting on his knee, giving him an account of the services they had heard. They soon heard loud exclamations from Miss Ophelia's room, which, like the one in which they were sitting, opened onto the veranda, and violent reproof addressed to somebody. "What new witchcraft has Topps been brewing?" asked St. Clair. "That commotion is of her raising, I'll be bound." And in a moment after, Miss Ophelia, in high indignation, came dragging the culprit down. "Come out here now," she said. "I will tell your master." "What's the case now?" asked Augustine. "The case is that I cannot be plagued with this child any longer. It's past all bearing. Flesh and blood cannot endure it. Here, I locked her up and gave her a hymn to study, and what does she do but spy out where I put my key, and has gone to my bureau and got a bonnet trimming and cut it all to pieces to make dolls' jackets. I never saw anything like it in my life." "I told you, cousin," said Marie, "that you'd find out that these creatures can't be brought up without severity. If I had my way, now," she said, looking reproachfully at St. Clair, "I'd send that child out and have her thoroughly whipped. I'd have her whipped till she couldn't stand." "I don't doubt it," said St. Clair. "Tell me of the lovely rule of woman. I never saw above a dozen women that wouldn't half kill a horse, or a servant either, if they had their own way with them, let alone a man." "There is no use in this shilly-shally way of yours, St. Clair," said Marie. "Cousin is a woman of sense, and she sees it now, as plain as I do." Miss Ophelia had just the capability of indignation that belongs to the thorough-paced housekeeper, and this had been pretty actively roused by the artifice and wastefulness of the child. In fact, many of my lady readers must own that they should have felt just so in her circumstances. But Marie's words went beyond her, and she felt less heat. "I wouldn't have the child treated so, for the world," she said. "But I am sure, Augustine, I don't know what to do. I've taught and taught. I've talked till I'm tired. I've whipped her. I've punished her in every way I can think of, and she's just what she was at first." "Come here, Topps, you monkey," said St. Clair, calling the child up to him. Topsy came up, her round hard eyes glittering and blinking, with a mixture of apprehensiveness and their usual odd drollery. "What makes you behave so?" said St. Clair, who could not help being amused with the child's expression. "'Spects it's my wicked heart," said Topsy, demurely. "Miss Feely says so." "Don't you see how much Miss Ophelia has done for you? She says she has done everything she can think of." "Law, yes, massa. Old missus used to say so, too. She whipped me a heap harder, and used to pull my ha'r, and knock my head agin the door, but it didn't do me no good. I spects if they's to pull every sparrow ha'r out of my head, it wouldn't do no good neither. I's so wicked, laws, I's nothing but a nigger no ways." "Well, I shall have to give her up," said Miss Ophelia. "I can't have that trouble any longer." "Well, I'd just like to ask you one question," said St. Clair. "What is it?" "Why, if your gospel is not strong enough to save one heathen child that you can have at home here all to yourself, what's the use of sending one or two poor missionaries off with it among thousands of just such? I suppose this child is about a fair sample of what thousands of your heathen are." Miss Ophelia did not make an immediate answer, and Eva, who had stood a silent spectator of the scene thus far, made a silent sign to Topsy to follow her. There was a little glass room at the corner of the veranda, which St. Clair used as a sort of reading room, and Eva and Topsy disappeared into this place. "What's Eva going about now?" said St. Clair. "I mean to see." And, advancing on tiptoe, he lifted up a curtain that covered the glass door, and looked in. In a moment, laying his finger on his lips, he made a silent gesture to Miss Ophelia to come and look. There sat the two children on the floor, with their side faces towards them. Topsy, with her usual air of careless drollery and unconcern, but opposite to her, Eva, her whole face fervent with feeling, and tears in her large eyes. "What does make you so bad, Topsy? Why won't you try and be good? Don't you love anybody, Topsy?" "Don't know nothing about love. I loves candy and sich, that's all," said Topsy. "But you love your father and mother." "Never had none, you know. I telled you that, Miss Eva." "Oh, I know," said Eva sadly. "But hadn't you any brother, or sister, or aunt, or—" "No,
None on 'em. Never had nothing nor nobody."
"But, Topsy, if you'd only try to be good, you might—"
"Couldn't never be nothing but a nigger if I was ever so good," said Topsy. "If I could be skinned and come white, I'd try then."
"But people can love you if you are black, Topsy. Miss Ophelia would love you if you were good."
Topsy gave the short, blunt laugh that was her common mode of expressing incredulity.
"Don't you think so?" said Eva.
"No, she can't bar me, 'cause I'm a nigger. She'd soon have a toad touch her. There can't nobody love niggers, and niggers can't do nothing. I don't care," said Topsy, beginning to whistle.
"Oh, Topsy, poor child, I love you,"
said Eva with a sudden burst of feeling, and laying her little thin white hand on Topsy's shoulder.
"I love you because you haven't had any father or mother or friends, because you've been a poor abused child. I love you, and I want you to be good. I am very unwell, Topsy, and I think I shan't live a great while, and it really grieves me to have you be so naughty. I wish you would try to be good, for my sake. It's only a little while I shall be with you."
The round, keen eyes of the black child were overcast with tears. Large, bright drops rolled heavily down, one by one, and fell on the little white hand. Yes, in that moment a ray of real belief, a ray of heavenly love, had penetrated the darkness of her heathen soul. She laid her head down between her knees, and wept and sobbed, while the beautiful child bending over her looked like the picture of some bright angel stooping to reclaim a sinner.
"Poor Topsy," said Eva, "don't you know that Jesus loves all alike? He is just as willing to love you as me. He loves you just as I do, only more, because he is better. He will help you to be good, and you can go to heaven at last, and be an angel forever, just as much as if you were white. Only think of it, Topsy. You can be one of those spirits bright Uncle Tom sings about."
"Oh, dear Miss Eva, dear Miss Eva," said the child. "I will try. I will try. I never did care nothing about it before."
St. Clair at this instant dropped the curtain.
"It puts me in mind of mother," he said to Miss Ophelia. "It is true what she told me. If we want to give sight to the blind, we must be willing to do as Christ did, call them to us and put our hands on them."
"I've always had a prejudice against negroes," said Miss Ophelia, "and it's a fact. I never could bear to have that child touch me. But I don't think she knew it."
"Trust any child to find that out," said St. Clair. "There's no keeping it from them. But I believe that all the trying in the world to benefit a child, and all the substantial favors you can do for them, will never excite one emotion of gratitude, while that feeling of repugnance remains in the heart. It's a queer kind of a fact, but so it is."
"I don't know how I can help it," said Miss Ophelia. "They are disagreeable to me. This child in particular. How can I help feeling so?"
"Eva does, it seems."
"Well, she's so loving. After all, though, she's no more than Christ-like," said Miss Ophelia. "I wish I were like her. She might teach me a lesson."
"It wouldn't be the first time a little child had been used to instruct an old disciple, if it were so," said St. Clair. End of chapter 25. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, Chapter 26. Death. Weep not for those whom the veil of the tomb, in life's early morning, hath hid from our eyes. From Weep Not for Those, a poem by Thomas Moore, 1779-1852. Eva's bedroom was a spacious apartment, which, like all the other robins in the house, opened onto the broad veranda. The room communicated on one side with her father and mother's apartment, on the other with that appropriated to Miss Ophelia. St. Clair had gratified his own eye and taste in furnishing this room in a style that had a peculiar keeping with the character of her for whom it was intended. The windows were hung with curtains of rose-colored and white muslin. The floor was spread with a matting which had been ordered in Paris to a pattern of his own device, having round it a border of rosebuds and leaves, and a centerpiece with full-flown roses. The bedstead, chairs, and lounges were of bamboo, wrought in peculiarly graceful and fanciful patterns. Over the head of the bed was an alabaster bracket, on which a beautiful sculptured angel stood, with drooping wings, holding out a crown of myrtle leaves. From this depended, over the bed, light curtains of rose-colored gauze, striped with silver, supplying that protection from mosquitoes which is an indispensable addition to all sleeping accommodation in that climate. The graceful bamboo lounges were amply supplied with cushions of rose-colored damask, while over them, depending from the hands of sculptured figures, were gauze curtains similar to those of the bed. A light, fanciful bamboo table stood in the middle of the room, where a Parian vase, wrought in the shape of a white lily, with its buds, stood, ever filled with flowers. On this table lay Eva's books and little trinkets, with an elegantly wrought alabaster writing-stand which her father had supplied to her when he saw her trying to improve herself in writing. There was a fireplace in the room, and on the marble mantel above stood a beautifully wrought statuette of Jesus receiving little children, and on either side marble vases, for which it was Tom's pride and delight to offer bouquets every morning. 2 or 3 exquisite paintings of children in various attitudes embellished the wall. In short, the eye could turn nowhere without meeting images of childhood, of beauty, and of peace. Those little eyes never opened in the morning light without falling on something which suggested to the heart soothing and beautiful thoughts. The deceitful strength which had buoyed Eva up for a little while was fast passing away. Seldom, and more seldom, her light footstep was heard in the veranda, and oftener she was found reclined on a little lounge by the open window, her large deep eyes fixed on the rising and falling waters of the lake. It was towards the middle of the afternoon, as she was so reclining, her Bible half open, her little transparent fingers lying listlessly between the leaves. Suddenly she heard her mother's voice, in sharp tones, in the veranda. "What now, you baggage? What new piece of mischief? You've been picking the flowers, hey?" And Eva heard the sound of a smart slap. "Law, missus, they's for Miss Eva," she heard a voice say, which she knew belonged to Topsy. "Miss Eva? A pretty excuse. You suppose she wants your flowers? You good-for-nothing nigger, get along off with you." In a moment Eva was off from her lounge and in the veranda. "Oh, don't, Mother. I should like the flowers. Do give them to me. I want them." "Why, Eva, your room is full now." "I can't have too many," said Eva. "Topsy, do bring them here." Topsy, who had stood sullenly, holding down her head, now came up and offered her flowers. She did it with a look of hesitation and bashfulness, quite unlike the eldritch boldness and brightness which was usual with her. "It's a beautiful bouquet," said Eva, looking at it. It was rather a singular one, a brilliant scarlet geranium, and one single white japonica, with its glossy leaves. It was tied up with an evident eye to the contrast of color, and the arrangement of every leaf had carefully been studied. Topsy looked pleased, as Eva said, "Topsy, you arrange flowers very prettily. Here," she said, "is this vase I haven't any flowers for. I wish you'd arrange something every day for it." "Well, that's odd," said Marie. "What in the world do you want that for?" "Never mind, Mamma. You'd as lief as not Topsy should do it, had you not?" "Of course, anything you please, dear. Topsy, you hear your young mistress? See that you mind." Topsy made a short curtsy and looked down, and as she turned away Eva saw a tear roll down her dark cheek. "You see, Mamma, I knew poor Topsy wanted to do something for me," said Eva to her mother. "Oh, nonsense. It's only because she likes to do mischief. She knows she mustn't pick flowers, so she does it. That's all there is to it. But if you fancy to have her pluck them, so be it." "Mamma, I think Topsy is different from what she used to be. She's trying to be a good girl." "She'll have to try a good while before she gets to be good," said Marie, with a careless laugh.
"Well, you know, Mamma, poor Topsy, everything has always been against her."
"Not since she's been here, I'm sure. If she hasn't been talked to and preached to and every earthly thing done that anybody could do, and she's just so ugly and always will be, you can't make anything of the creature."
"But, Mamma, it's so different to be brought up as I've been, with so many friends, so many things to make me good and happy, and to be brought up as she's been all the time, till she came here."
"Most likely," said Marie, yawning. "Dear me, how hot it is."
Mamma, you believe, don't you, that Topsy could become an angel as well as any of us, if she were a Christian?"
"Topsy? What a ridiculous idea! Nobody but you would ever think of it. I suppose she could, though."
"But, Mamma, isn't God her Father as much as ours? Isn't Jesus her Savior?"
"Well, that may be. I suppose God made everybody," said Marie.
"Where is my smelling bottle?" "It's such a pity, oh, such a pity," said Eva, looking out on the distant lake and speaking half to herself.
"What's a pity?" said Marie.
"Why, that any one who could be a bright angel and live with angels should go all down, 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 and nobody help them. Oh, dear!"
"Well, we can't help them. It's no use worrying, Eva. I don't know what's to be done. We ought to be thankful for our own advantages."
"I hardly can be," said Eva. "I'm so sorry to think of poor folks that haven't any."
"That's odd enough," said Marie. "I'm sure my religion makes me thankful for my advantages."
"Mamma," said Eva, "I want to have some of my hair cut off, a good deal of it."
"What for?" said Marie.
"Mamma, I want to give some away to my friends while I am able to give it to them myself. Won't you ask Auntie to come and cut it for me?"
Marie raised her voice and called Miss Ophelia from the other room. The child half rose from her pillow as she came in, and, shaking down her long golden-brown curls, said rather playfully,
"Come, Auntie, shear the sheep."
"What's that?" said St. Clair, who just then entered with some fruit he had been out to get for her.
"Papa, I just want Auntie to cut off some of my hair. There's too much of it, and it makes my head hot. Besides, I want to give some of it away."
Miss Ophelia came with her scissors. "Take care. Don't spoil the looks of it," said her father. "Cut underneath, where it won't show. Eva's curls are my pride."
"Oh, Papa," said Eva sadly.
"Yes, and I want them kept handsome against the time I take you up to your uncle's plantation to see Cousin Henrik," said St. Clair in a gay tone.
"I shall never go there, Papa. I am going to a better country. Oh, do believe me. Don't you see, Papa, that I get weaker every day?"
"Why do you insist that I shall believe such a cruel thing, Eva?" said her father.
"Only because it is true, Papa. And if you will believe it now, perhaps you will get to feel about it as I do."
St. Clair closed his lips and stood gloomily eyeing the long, beautiful curls, which, as they were separated from the child's head, were laid, one by one, in her lap. She raised them up, looked earnestly at them, twined them round her thin fingers, and looked from time to time anxiously at her father. "It's just what I've been foreboding," said Marie. "It's just what has been preying on my health from day to day, bringing me downward to the grave, though nobody regards it. I have seen this long. St. Clair, you will see after a while that I was right." "Which will afford you great consolation, no doubt," said St. Clair in a dry, bitter tone. Marie lay back on a lounge and covered her face with her cambric handkerchief. Eva's clear blue eye looked earnestly from one to the other. It was the calm, comprehending gaze of a soul half loosed from its earthly bonds. It was evident she saw, felt, and appreciated the difference between the two. She beckoned with her hand to her father. He came and sat down by her.
"Papa, my strength fades away every day, and I know I must go. There are some things I want to say and do that I ought to do, and you are so unwilling to have me speak a word on this subject, but it must come. There's no putting it off. Do be willing I should speak now."
"My child, I am willing," said St. Clair, covering his eyes with one hand and holding up Eva's hand with the other.
"Then I want to see all our people together. I have some things I must say to them," said Eva.
"Well," said St. Clair in a tone of dry endurance. Miss Ophelia dispatched a messenger, and soon the whole of the servants were convened in the room. Eva lay back on her pillows, her hair hanging loosely about her face, her crimson cheeks contrasting painfully with the intense whiteness of her complexion, and the thin contour of her limbs and features, and her large, soul-like eyes fixed earnestly on every one. The servants were struck with a sudden emotion. The spiritual face, the long locks of hair cut off and lying by her, her father's averted face, and Marie's sobs, struck at once upon the feelings of a sensitive and impressible race, and, as they came in, they looked one on another, sighed, and shook their heads. There was a deep silence, like that of a funeral. Eva raised herself, and looked long and earnestly round at every one. All looked sad and apprehensive. Many of the women hid their faces in their aprons.
"I sent for you all, my dear friends," said Eva, "because I love you. I love you all, and I have something to say to you, which I want you always to remember. I am going to leave you. In a few more weeks you will see me no more."
Here the child was interrupted by bursts of groans, sobs, and lamentations, which broke from all present, and in which her slender voice was lost entirely. She waited a moment, and then, speaking in a tone that checked the sobs of all, she said,
"If you love me, you must not interrupt me so. Listen to what I say. I want to speak to you about your souls. Many of you, I am afraid, are very careless. You are thinking only about this world. I want you to remember that there is a beautiful world where Jesus is. I am going there, and you can go there. It is for you as much as me. But if you want to go there, you must not live idle, careless, thoughtless lives. You must be Christians. You must remember that each one of you can become angels, and be angels forever. If you want to be Christians, Jesus will help you. You must pray to him. You must read."
The child checked herself, looked piteously at them, and said sorrowfully,
"Oh, dear, you can't read, poor souls."
And she hid her face in the pillow and sobbed, while many a smothered sob from those she was addressing, who were kneeling on the floor, aroused her.
"Never mind,"
she said, raising her face and smiling brightly through her tears.
"I have prayed for you, and I know Jesus will help you, even if you can't read. Try all to do the best you can. Pray every day. Ask him to help you, and get the Bible read to you whenever you can, and I think I shall see you in heaven."
"Amen," was the murmured response from the lips of Tom and Mammy, and some of the elder ones who belonged to the Methodist Church. The younger and more thoughtless ones, for the time completely overcome, were sobbing, with their heads bowed upon their knees.
"I know," said Eva, "you all love me."
"Yes, oh yes, indeed we do, Lord bless her," was the involuntary answer of all.
"Yes, I know you do. There isn't one of you that hasn't always been very kind to me, and I want to give you something that, when you look at, you shall always remember me. I'm going to give all of you a curl of my hair, and, when you look at it, think that I loved you, and am gone to heaven, and that I want to see you all there."
It is impossible to describe the scene, as, with tears and sobs, they gathered round the little creature, and took from her hands what seemed to them a last mark of her love. They fell on their knees, they sobbed and prayed and kissed the hem of her garment, and the elder ones poured forth words of endearment, mingled in prayers and blessings, after the manner of their susceptible race. As each one took their gift, Miss Ophelia, who was apprehensive for the effect of all this excitement on her little patient, signed to each one to pass out of the apartment. At last all were gone but Tom and Mammy.
"Here, Uncle Tom," said Eva, "is a beautiful one for you. Oh, I am so happy, Uncle Tom, to think I shall see you in heaven, for I am sure I shall. And Mammy, dear, good, kind Mammy," she said fondly, throwing her arms around her old nurse, "I know you'll be there, too."
"Oh, Miss Eva, don't see how I can live without you, nohow," said the faithful creature.
"'Pears like it's just taking everything off the place to oncet."
And Mammy gave way to a passion of grief. Miss Ophelia pushed her and Tom gently from the apartment, and thought they were all gone. But as she turned, Topsy was standing there.
"Where did you start up from?" she said suddenly. "I was here," said Topsy, wiping the tears from her eyes. "Oh, Miss Eva, I've been a bad girl, but won't you give me one, too?" "Yes, poor Topsy, to be sure I will. There, every time you look at that, think that I love you, and wanted you to be a good girl." "Oh, Miss Eva, I is trying," said Topsy earnestly. "But, Lord, it's so hard to be good. 'Pears like I ain't used to it, no ways. Jesus knows it, Topsy. He is sorry for you. He will help you."
Topsy, with her eyes hid in her apron, was silently passed from the apartment by Miss Ophelia. But as she went, she hid the precious curl in her bosom. All being gone, Miss Ophelia shut the door. That worthy lady had wiped away many tears of her own during the scene, but concern for the consequence of such an excitement to her young charge was uppermost in her mind. St. Clair had been sitting during the whole time with his hand shading his eyes, in the same attitude. When they were all gone, he sat so still.
"Papa,"
said Eva, gently, laying her hand on his. He gave a sudden start and shiver, but made no answer.
"Dear papa,"
said Eva. "I cannot," said St. Clair, rising. "I cannot have it so. The Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me." And St. Clair pronounced these words with a bitter emphasis indeed.
"Augustine, has not God a right to do what he will with his own?" said Miss Ophelia.
"Perhaps so, but that doesn't make it any easier to bear," said he, with a dry, hard, tearless manner, as he turned away.
"Papa, you break my heart,"
said Eva, rising and throwing herself into his arms.
"You must not feel so."
The child sobbed and wept with a violence which alarmed them all, and turned her father's thoughts at once to another channel.
"There, Eva, there, dearest. Hush, hush, I was wrong. I was wicked. I will feel anyway, do anyway. Only don't distress yourself. Don't sob so. I will be resigned. I was wicked to speak as I did."
Eva soon lay like a wearied dove in her father's arms, and he, bending over her, soothed her by every tender word he could think of. Marie rose and threw herself out of the apartment into her own, when she fell into violent hysterics.
"You didn't give me a curl, Eva," said her father, smiling sadly. "They are all yours, papa," said she, smiling, "yours and mamma's, and you must give dear auntie as many as she wants. I only gave them to our poor people myself, because, you know, papa, they might be forgotten when I am gone, and because I hoped it might help them remember. You are a Christian, are you not, papa?" said Eva doubtfully.
"Why do you ask me?"
"I don't know. You are so good, I don't see how you can help it."
"What is being a Christian, Eva?"
"Loving Christ most of all," said Eva.
"Do you, Eva?"
"Certainly I do."
"You never saw him," said St. Clair.
"That makes no difference," said Eva. "I believe him, and in a few days I shall see him."
And the young face grew fervent, radiant with joy. St. Clair said no more. It was a feeling which he had seen before in his mother, but no chord within vibrated to it. Eva, after this, declined rapidly. There was no more any doubt of the event. The fondest hope could not be blinded. Her beautiful room was avowedly a sick room, and Miss Ophelia day and night performed the duties of a nurse, and never did her friends appreciate her value more than in that capacity. With so well trained a hand and eye, such perfect adroitness and practice in every art which could promote neatness and comfort, and keep out of sight every disagreeable incident of sickness, with such a perfect sense of time, such a clear, untroubled head, such exact accuracy in remembering every prescription and direction of the doctors, she was everything to him. They who had shrugged their shoulders at her little peculiarities and setnesses, so unlike the careless freedom of Southern manners, acknowledged that now she was the exact person that was wanted. Uncle Tom was much in Eva's room. The child suffered much from nervous restlessness, and it was a relief to her to be carried, and it was Tom's greatest delight to carry her little frail form in his arms, resting on a pillow, now up and down her room, now out into the veranda, and when the fresh sea breezes blew from the lake, and the child felt freshest in the morning, he would sometimes walk with her under the orange trees in the garden, or, sitting down in some of their old seats, sing to her their favorite old hymns. Her father often did the same thing, but his frame was slighter, and when he was weary, Eva would say to him, "Oh, papa, let Tom take me. Poor fellow, it pleases him, and you know it's all he can do now, and he wants to do something." "So do I, Eva," said her father.
"Well, papa, you can do everything, and are everything to me. You read to me, you sit up nights, and Tom has only this one thing and his singing. And I know, too, he does it easier than you can. He carries me so strong."
The desire to do something was not confined to Tom. Every servant in the establishment showed the same feeling, and in their way did what they could. Poor Mammy's heart yearned toward her darling, but she found no opportunity night or day, as Marie declared that the state of her mind was such it was impossible for her to rest. And, of course, it was against her principles to let anyone else rest. 20 times in a night Mammy would be roused to rub her feet, to bathe her head, to find her pocket-handkerchief, to see what the noise was in Eva's room, to let down a curtain because it was too light, or to put it up because it was too dark. And in the daytime, when she longed to have some share in the nursing of her pet, Marie seemed unusually ingenuous in keeping her busy anywhere and everywhere all over the house, or about her own person, so that stolen interviews and momentary glimpses were all she could obtain.
"I feel it is my duty to be particularly careful of myself now," she would say, "feeble as I am, and with the whole care and nursing of that dear child upon me."
"Indeed, my dear," said St. Clair, "I thought our cousin relieved you of that."
"You talk like a man, St. Clair, just as if a mother could be relieved of the care of a child in that state. But then, it's all alike. No one ever knows what I feel. I can't throw things off as you do."
St. Clair smiled. You must excuse him. He couldn't help it, for St. Clair could smile yet. For so bright and placid was the farewell voyage of the little spirit, by such sweet and fragrant breezes was the small bark borne toward the heavenly shores, that it was impossible to realize that it was death that was approaching. The child felt no pain, only a tranquil, soft weakness, daily and almost insensibly increasing. And she was so beautiful, so loving, so trustful, so happy, that one could not resist the soothing influence of that air of innocence and peace which seemed to breathe around her. St. Clair found a strange calm coming over him. It was not hope, that was impossible. It was not resignation. It was only a calm resting in the present, which seemed so beautiful that he wished to think of no future. It was like that hush of spirit which we feel amid the bright, mild woods of autumn, when the bright hectic flush is on the trees, and the last lingering flowers by the brook, and we joy in it all the more because we know that soon it will all pass away. The friend who knew most of Eva's own imaginings and foreshadowings was her faithful bearer, Tom. To him she said what she would not disturb her father by saying. To him she imparted those mysterious intimations which the soul feels as the cords begin to unbind ere it leaves its clay forever. Tom, at last, would not sleep in his room, but lay all night in the outer veranda, ready to rouse at every call.
"Uncle Tom, what alive have you taken to sleeping anywhere and everywhere like a dog for?" said Miss Ophelia. "I thought you was one of the orderly sort that liked to lie in bed in a Christian way."
"I do, Miss Feely," said Tom mysteriously. "I do, but now—"
"Well, what now?"
"We mustn't speak loud. Master St. Clair won't hear on't. But, Miss Feely, you know there must be somebody watching for the bridegroom."
"What do you mean, Tom?"
"You know it says in the Scripture, at midnight there was a great cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh. That's what I'm expecting now every night, Miss Feely, and I couldn't sleep out of hearing, no ways."
"Well, Uncle Tom, what makes you think so?"
"Miss Eva, she talks to me. The Lord, He sends His messenger in the soul. I must be thar, Miss Feely. For when that our blessed child goes into the kingdom, they'll open the door so wide we'll all get a look in at the glory, Miss Feely."
"Uncle Tom, did Miss Eva say she felt more unwell than usual tonight?"
"No, but she telled me this morning she was coming nearer. There's them that tells it to the child, Miss Feely. It's the angels. It's the trumpet sound afore the break of day," said Tom, quoting from a favorite hymn. This dialogue passed between Miss Ophelia and Tom between 10 and 11 one evening, after her arrangements had all been made for the night, when, on going to bolt her outer door, she found Tom stretched along by it in the outer veranda. She was not nervous or impressible, but the solemn, heartfelt manner struck her. Eva had been unusually bright and cheerful that afternoon, and had sat raised in her bed, and looked over all her little trinkets and precious things, and designated the friends to whom she would have them given, and her manner was more animated, and her voice more natural, than they had known it for weeks. Her father had been in the evening, and had said that Eva appeared more like her former self than ever she had done since her sickness. And when he kissed her for the night, he said to Miss Ophelia, "Cousin, We may keep her with us after all. She is certainly better." And he had retired with a lighter heart in his bosom than he had had there for weeks. But at midnight, strange mystic hour, when the veil between the frail present and the eternal future grows thin, then came the messenger. There was a sound in that chamber, first of one who stepped quickly. It was Miss Ophelia, who had resolved to sit up all night with her little charge, and who, at the turn of the night, had discerned what experienced nurses significantly call a change. The outer door was quickly opened, and Tom, who was watching outside, was on the alert in a moment. "Go for the doctor, Tom. Lose not a moment," said Miss Ophelia, and stepping across the room she rapped at St. Clair's door. "Cousin," she said, "I wish you would come." Those words fell on his heart like clods upon a coffin. Why did they? He was up and in the room in an instant, and bending over Eva, who still slept. What was it he saw that made his heart stand still? Why was no word spoken between the two? Thou canst say, who hast seen that same expression on the face dearest to thee, that look indescribable, hopeless, unmistakable, that says to thee that thy beloved is no longer thine. On the face of the child, however, there was no ghastly imprint, only a high and almost sublime expression, the overshadowing presence of spiritual natures, the dawning of immortal life in that childish soul. They stood there so still, gazing upon her, that even the ticking of the watch seemed too loud. In a few moments Tom returned with the doctor. He entered, gave one look, and stood silent as the rest. "When did this change take place?" said he in a low whisper to Miss Ophelia. "About the turn of the night," was the reply. Marie, roused by the entrance of the doctor, appeared hurriedly from the next room. "Augustine? Cousin? Oh, what?" she hurriedly began. "Hush," said St. Clair hoarsely. "She is dying." Mammy heard the words and flew to awaken the servants. The house was soon roused. Lights were seen, footsteps heard, anxious faces thronged the veranda, and looked tearfully through the glass doors. But St. Clair heard and said nothing. He saw only that look on the face of the little sleeper. "Oh, if she would only wake and speak once more," he said, and stooping over her he spoke in her ear. "Eva, darling." The large blue eyes unclosed. A smile passed over her face. She tried to raise her head and to speak. "Do you know me, Eva?" "Dear papa," said the child with a last effort, throwing her arms about his neck. In a moment they dropped again, and as St. Clair raised his head he saw a spasm of mortal agony pass over the face. She struggled for breath, and threw up her little hands. "Oh, God, this is dreadful," he said, turning away in agony and wringing Tom's hand, scarce conscious of what he was doing. "Oh, Tom, my boy, it is killing me." Tom had his master's hands between his own, and with tears streaming down his dark cheeks, looked up for help where he had always been used to look. "Pray that this may be cut short," said St. Clair. "This wrings my heart." "Oh, bless the Lord, it's over, dear master," said Tom. "Look at her." The child lay panting on her pillows, as one exhausted, the large clear eyes rolled up and fixed. Ah, what said those eyes that spoke so much of heaven? Earth was past, and earthly pain. But so solemn, so mysterious was the triumphant brightness of that face, that it checked even the sobs of sorrow. They pressed around her in breathless stillness. "Eva," said St. Clair gently. She did not hear. "Oh, Eva, tell us what you see. What is it?" said her father. A bright, a glorious smile passed over her face, and she said brokenly, "Oh, love, joy, peace," gave one sigh, and passed from death unto life. Farewell, beloved child. The bright eternal doors have closed after thee. We shall see thy sweet face no more. Oh, woe for them who watch thy entrance into heaven, when they shall wake and find only the cold gray sky of daily life, and thou gone forever. End of chapter 26. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, Chapter 27. This is the last of the earth. Note, this is the last of the earth, I am content. Last words of John Quincy Adams, uttered February 21st, 1848. The statuettes and pictures in Eva's room were shrouded in white napkins, and only hushed breathings and muffled footfalls were heard there, and the light stole in solemnly through windows partially darkened by closed blinds. The bed was draped in white, and there, beneath the drooping angel figure, lay a little sleeping form, sleeping never to awaken. There she lay, robed in one of the simple white dresses she had been wont to wear when living. The rose-colored light through the curtains cast over the icy coldness of death a warm glow. The heavy eyelashes drooped softly on the pure cheek. The head was turned a little to one side, as if in natural sleep. But there was diffused over every lineament of the face that high celestial expression, that mingling of rapture and repose, which showed it was no earthly or temporary sleep, but the long, sacred rest which He giveth to His beloved. There is no death to such as thou, dear Eva, neither darkness nor shadow of death, only such a bright fading as when the morning star fades in the golden dawn. Thine is the victory without the battle, the crown without the conflict. So did St. Clair think, as with folded arms he stood there gazing. Ah, who shall say what he did think? For from the hour that voices had said in the dying chamber, "She is gone," it had been all a dreary mist, a heavy dimness of anguish. He had heard voices around him, he had had questions asked and answered them. They had asked him when he would have the funeral, and where they should lay her, and he had answered impatiently that he cared not. Adolphe and Rosa had arranged the chamber. Volatile, fickle and childish as they generally were, they were soft-hearted and full of feeling, and, while Miss Ophelia presided over the general details of order and neatness, it was their hands that added those soft, poetic touches to the arrangements, that took from the death-room the grim and ghastly air which too often marks a New England funeral. There were still flowers on the shelves, all white, delicate, and fragrant, with graceful drooping leaves. Eva's little table, covered with white, bore on it her favorite vase, with a single white moss rosebud in it. The folds of the drapery, the fall of the curtains, had been arranged and rearranged by Adolphe and Rosa, with that nicety of eye which characterizes their race. Even now, while St. Clair stood there thinking, little Rosa tripped softly into the chamber with a basket of white flowers. She stepped back when she saw St. Clair, and stopped respectfully. But, seeing that he did not observe her, she came forward to place them around the dead. St. Clair saw her as in a dream, while she placed in the small hands a fair Cape jessamine, and with admirable taste disposed other flowers around the couch. The door opened again, and Topsy, her eyes swelled with crying, appeared, holding something under her apron. Rosa made a quick forbidding gesture, but she took a step into the room. "You must go out," said Rosa, in a sharp, positive whisper. "You haven't any business here." "Oh, do let me. I brought a flower. Such a pretty one," said Topsy, holding up a half-blown tea rosebud. "Do let me just put one there." "Get along," said Rosa, more decidedly. "Let her stay," said St. Clair, suddenly stamping his foot. "She shall come." Rosa suddenly retreated, and Topsy came forward and laid her offering at the feet of the corpse. Then suddenly, with a wild and bitter cry, she threw herself on the floor alongside the bed and wept and moaned aloud. Miss Ophelia hastened into the room and tried to raise and silence her, but in vain. "Oh, Miss Eva! Oh, Miss Eva! I wish I's dead, too, I do!" There was a piercing wildness in the cry. The blood flushed into St. Clair's white, marble-like face, and the first tears he had shed since Eva died stood in his eyes. "Get up, child," said Miss Ophelia, in a softened voice. "Don't cry so. Miss Eva is gone to heaven. She is an angel." "But I can't see her," said Topsy. "I never shall see her." And she sobbed again. They all stood a moment in silence. "She said she loved me," said Topsy. "She did. Oh, dear, there ain't nobody left now, there ain't." "That's true enough," said St. Clair. "But do he said to Miss Ophelia. "See if you can't comfort the poor creature."
"I just wish I hadn't never been born," said Topsy. "I didn't want to be born, no ways, and I don't see no use on't."
Miss Ophelia raised her gently but firmly, and took her from the room. But as she did so, some tears fell from her eyes.
"Topsy, you poor child," she said as she led her into her room, "don't give up. I can love you, though I am not like that dear little child. I hope I've learned something of the love of Christ from her. I can love you. I do, and I'll try to help you to grow up a good Christian girl."
Miss Ophelia's voice was more than her words, and more than that were the honest tears that fell down her face. From that hour she acquired an influence over the mind of the destitute child that she never lost. "Oh, my Eva, whose little hour on earth did so much of good," thought St. Clair, "what account have I to give for my long years?" There were for a while soft whisperings and footfalls in the chamber as one after another stole in to look at the dead. And then came the little coffin, and then there was a funeral, and carriages drove to the door, and strangers came and were seated. And there were white scarves and ribbons, and crape bands, and mourners dressed in black crape, and there were words read from the Bible, and prayers offered, and St. Clair lived, and walked, and moved, as one who has shed every tear. To the last he saw only one thing, that golden head in the coffin. But then he saw the cloth spread over it, the lid of the coffin closed, and he walked, when he was put beside the others, down to a little place at the bottom of the garden, and there, by the mossy seat where she and Tom had talked, and sung, and read so often, was the little grave. St. Clair stood beside it, looked vacantly down. He saw them lower the little coffin. He heard dimly the solemn words, "I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live." And as the earth was cast in and filled up the little grave, he could not realize that it was his Eva that they were hiding from his sight. Nor was it, not Eva, but only the frail seed of that bright immortal form with which she shall yet come forth in the day of the Lord Jesus. And then all were gone, and the mourners went back to the place which should know her no more, and Marie's room was darkened, and she lay on the bed, sobbing and moaning in uncontrollable grief, and calling every moment for the attentions of all her servants. Of course they had no time to cry. Why should they? The grief was her grief, and she was fully convinced that nobody on earth did, could, or would feel as she did.
"St. Clair did not shed a tear," she said. "He didn't sympathize with her. It was perfectly wonderful to think how hard-hearted and unfeeling he was, when he must know how she suffered."
So much are people the slave of their eye and ear that many of the servants really thought that Mrs. was the principal sufferer in the case, especially as Marie began to have hysterical spasms, and sent for the doctor, and at last declared herself dying. And in the running and scampering and bringing up hot bottles and heating of flannels and chafing and fussing that ensued, there was quite a diversion. Tom, however, had a feeling at his own heart that drew him to his master. He followed him wherever he walked, wistfully and sad, and when he saw him sitting, so pale and quiet, in Eva's room, holding before his eyes her little open Bible, though seeing no letter or word of what was in it, there was more sorrow to Tom in that still, fixed, tearless eye than in all Marie's moans and lamentations. In a few days the St. Clair family were back again in the city, Augustine, with the restlessness of grief, longing for another scene to change the current of his thoughts. So they left the house and garden with its little grave, and came back to New Orleans. And St. Clair walked the streets busily, and strove to fill up the chasm in his heart with hurry and bustle and change of place. And people who saw him in the street or met him at the café knew of his loss only by the weed on his hat. For there he was, smiling and talking and reading the newspaper and speculating on politics and attending to business matters, and who could see that all this smiling outside was but a hollowed shell over a heart that was a dark and silent sepulchre?
"Mr. St. Clair is a singular man," said Marie to Miss Ophelia, in a complaining tone. "I used to think, if there was anything in the world he did love, it was our dear little Eva. But he seems to be forgetting her very easily. I cannot ever get him to talk about her. I really did think he would show more feeling."
"Still waters run deepest, they used to tell me," said Miss Ophelia oracularly.
"Oh, I don't believe in such things. It's all talk. If people have feelings, they will show it. They can't help it. But, then, it's a great misfortune to have feeling. I'd rather have been made like St. Clair. My feelings prey upon me so." "Sure, Mrs. Master St. Clair is getting thin as a shader. They say he don't never eat nothing," said Mammy. "I know he don't forget Miss Eva. I know there couldn't nobody. A dear little blessed critter," she added, wiping her eyes. "Well, at all events, he has no consideration for me," said Marie. "He hasn't spoken one word of sympathy, and he must know how much more a mother feels than any man can."
"The heart knoweth its own bitterness," said Miss Ophelia gravely.
"That's just what I think. I know just what I feel. Nobody else seems to. Eva used to, but she is gone."
And Marie lay back on her lounge and began to sob disconsolately. Marie was one of those unfortunately constituted mortals in whose eyes whatever is lost and gone assumes a value which it never had in possession. Whatever she had, she seemed to survey only to pick flaws in it, but, once fairly away, there was no end to her valuation of it. While this conversation was taking place in the parlor, another was going on in St. Clair's library. Tom, who was always uneasily following his master about, had seen him go to his library some hours before, and after vainly waiting for him to come out, determined at last to make an errand in. He entered softly. St. Clair lay on his lounge at the further end of the room. He was lying on his face, with Eva's Bible open before him at a little distance. Tom walked up and stood by the sofa. He hesitated, and while he was hesitating, St. Clair suddenly raised himself up. The honest face, so full of grief, and with such an imploring expression of affection and sympathy, struck his master. He laid his hand on Tom's, and bowed down his forehead on it. "Oh, Tom, my boy, the whole world is as empty as an egg-shell." "I know it, massa, I know it," said Tom. "But oh, if massa could only look up where our dear Eva is, up to the dear Lord Jesus."
"Ah, Tom, I do look up, but the trouble is I don't see anything when I do. I wish I could." Tom sighed heavily. "It seems to be given to children and poor honest fellows like you to see what we can't," said St. Clair. "How comes it?"
"Thou hast hid from the wise and prudent, and revealed unto babes," murmured Tom. "Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in thy sight."
"Tom, I don't believe. I can't believe. I've got the habit of doubting," said St. Clair. "I want to believe this Bible, and I can't."
"Dear massa, pray to the good Lord. Lord, I believe. Help thou my unbelief."
"Who knows anything about anything?" said St. Clair, his eyes wandering dreamily and speaking to himself. Was all that beautiful love and faith only one of the ever-shifting phases of human feeling, having nothing real to rest on, passing away with a little breath? And is there no more Eva, no heaven, no Christ, nothing?
"Oh, dear massa, there is. I know it. I'm sure of it," said Tom, falling on his knees.
Do, dear massa, believe it." "How do you know there's any Christ, Tom? You never saw the Lord."
"Felt him in my soul, massa. Feel him now."
"Oh, massa, when I was sold away from my old woman and the children, I was just the most broke up. I felt as if there warn't nothing left. And then the good Lord, he stood by me, and he says, 'Fear not, Tom.' And he brings light and joy in a poor feller's soul. Makes all peace. And I is so happy, and loves everybody, and feels willing just to be the Lord's, and have the Lord's will done, and be put just where the Lord wants to put me. I know it couldn't come from me, 'cause I's a poor complaining critter. It comes from the Lord, and I know he's willing to do for Masser." Tom spoke with fast-running tears and choking voice. St. Clair leaned his head on his shoulder and wrung the hard, faithful black hand. "Tom, you love me," he said. "I's willing to lay down my life this blessed day to see Masser a Christian." "Poor foolish boy," said St. Clair, half raising himself.
I'm not worth the love of one good honest heart like yours." "Oh, massa, there's more than me loves you. The blessed Lord Jesus loves you."
"How do you know that, Tom?" said St. Clair.
"Feels it in my soul. Oh, massa, the love of Christ that passeth knowledge."
"Singular," said St. Clair, turning away, "that the story of a man that lived and died 1800 years ago can affect people so yet. But he was no man," he added suddenly. "No man ever had such long and living power. Oh, that I could believe what my mother taught me, and pray as I did when I was a boy."
"If massa pleases," said Tom, "Miss Eva used to read this so beautifully. I wish massa'd be so good as read it. Don't get no reading hardly, now Miss Eva's gone."
The chapter was the 11th of John, the touching account of the raising of Lazarus. St. Clair read it aloud, often pausing to wrestle down feelings which were roused by the pathos of the story. Tom knelt before him with clasped hands, and with an absorbed expression of love, trust, adoration on his quiet face. "Tom," said his master, "this is all real to you."
"I can just fairly see it, massa," said Tom.
"I wish I had your eyes, Tom."
"I wish to the dear Lord massa had."
"But, Tom, you know that I have a great deal more knowledge than you. What if I should tell you that I don't believe this Bible?"
"Oh, massa,"
said Tom, holding up his hands with a deprecating gesture, "wouldn't it shake your faith some, Tom?"
"Not a grain," said Tom.
"Why, Tom, you must know I know the most."
"Oh, massa, haven't you just read how he hides from the wise and prudent and reveals unto babes? But massa wasn't in earnest for sartain now,"
said Tom anxiously.
"No, Tom, I was not.
I don't disbelieve, and I think there is reason to believe, and still I don't. It's a troublesome bad habit I've got, Tom."
"If massa would only pray."
"How do you know I don't, Tom?"
"Does massa?"
"I would, Tom, if there was anybody there when I pray, but it's all speaking unto nothing when I do. But come, Tom, you pray now, and show me how." Tom's heart was full. He poured it out in prayer, like waters that have been long suppressed. One thing was plain enough: Tom thought there was somebody to hear, whether there were or not. In fact, St. Clair felt himself borne on the tide of his faith and feeling, almost to the gates of that heaven he seemed so vividly to conceive. It seemed to bring him nearer to Eva. "Thank you, Tom, my boy," said St. Clair when Tom rose. "I like to hear you, Tom. But go now, and leave me alone. Some other time I'll talk more." Tom silently left the room. End of chapter 27.